Everyday life in ancient Greece. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 76. Second opening. There are loopholes. The second half has been rewritten. Romulus' 10 horses were exchanged for nearly 4 talents of gold and silver in Sparta, which was an astonishing fortune. He had exchanged more than 1 talent in the past few days, and he did not expect to exchange all the remaining gold. He kept the gold of high value and easy to carry, and only brought silver of different fineness. But even so, these silvers were worth at least 1 talent. After the first few guests exchanged and left, Romulus and his slaves carried his heavy box of gold and silver to the counter and opened the box a crack to show the goldsmith at the counter. The goldsmith stretched out his hand to check it and asked in surprise, "Are all these exchanged?" Romulus said, "Yes." The goldsmith hesitated and said, "Please wait a moment." He left the counter. A moment later, he came out of a door leading to the back house from the shop and invited, "Please come here." Romulus's slaves were a little nervous and alert, but Romulus walked in calmly. The door led to a neat little room, with a set of tables and chairs of novel style, and tools such as scales on the table. Standing by the table was a boy of 7 or 8 years old with elegant temperament and very beautiful appearance. When Romulus entered, he nodded to him. Romulus originally thought that he was a servant boy, and looked at him with appreciation. When the goldsmith began to value the silver he brought, Romulus realized that the boy's identity seemed to be not simple, because the goldsmith asked for his opinion before taking action, and was very respectful to him. Romulus curiously asked the goldsmith, "Who is this little heiress?" The boy did not speak, and the goldsmith saw that he had no intention of revealing his identity, so he smiled and did not answer. The box of silver that Romulus brought was of different qualities, with a total weight of 1 talent and 6 minas. After the goldsmith's valuation, he quoted a price of 3660 drachmas, which is 915 owl coins. This price was very fair, and it was cheaper than exchanging it bit by bit with others, and Romulus was very satisfied. 915 owl coins were counted and placed in front of him, and his eyes narrowed into slits with laughter. After putting the coins back into the box, he still asked greedily, "I still have some gold that I want to exchange. Can I exchange it?" The goldsmith asked, "How much?" Romulus replied, "Almost this number." The goldsmith looked at the little boy for instructions. The boy thought about it and said, "Yes, but you need to wait until tomorrow. There are not so many owl coins today." Romulus didn't have time to wait, and hurriedly asked, "How much can I exchange today?" The boy said, "I can't exchange it for you today. We just opened. If I exchange it for you, others will not be able to exchange it." Romulus left with the slave with a little regret. After returning to the hotel, Romulus no longer exchanged silver coins with people. The gold-silver exchange rate in Athens was 13 to 1. People who came to the hotel to exchange with him usually only took 1 or 2 owl coins, which was a bit difficult to exchange for gold. If the gold was divided too small, it would be damaged, and it was not worth the trouble. But because of his action, the rumor about the strength of Pluto's bank spread quietly. Everyone still remembered his generous spirit when he exchanged coins before. People quietly guessed how much he exchanged this time. Did he exchange all of it? At least dozens of drachmas, right? Maybe 1 talent. He is a horse dealer. Last time at the livestock market, someone was selling horses. A medium-sized horse was priced at 1,200 drachmas. He brought so many slaves, so he must have brought at least 5 or 6 horses, right? That must be several talents. We have also seen how many people came to exchange coins with him in the past 2 days. I asked his slaves. This time they brought 10 horses to Sparta to sell. Oh my god. Did Plato exchange 3 or 4 talents for him in one go? People were immediately in awe of Plato's strength. This respect was further enhanced when some other merchants went to exchange money and Plato actually had money to exchange. When the news reached the ears of some specific groups of people, they were very panicked. "Didn't you say that Sophonesco promised not to exchange money for that guy?" He did agree. Where did this guy get so many owl coins? Where else can you get so many owl coins at once except the mint? Go ask Sophonicus again. Did he cheat us? Sophonesco was asked this question and answered with a smile. I didn't exchange money for him anymore. The shop is mine now. I want to set up a currency exchange point directly in the port area. Don't worry, it won't affect your business. I will keep the same rate as you. You can still exchange money at the mint at the old price. The person who questioned him. They couldn't bully Sophonesco like they suppressed Cerebus. Sophonesco was the one who gave them a job. If he suddenly didn't want to give it to anyone, there was nothing they could do, not to mention that he hadn't said he wouldn't give it to them. The person who questioned him returned empty-handed. The people who went to question Sophonesco brought back the news that Sophonesco was involved in their business. All the money changers in Athens were panicked and made an appointment to get together to discuss countermeasures. After much discussion, they finally came to the conclusion that there was no way to deal with it for the time being, so they had to wait and see. Without anyone to cause trouble, the second opening of the Plato Bank went smoothly. The only trouble might be that the business was too good. The owl coins sent by Sophonesco were often not enough to exchange, but the mint had limited production capacity, and Sophonesco was powerless. Sophonesco could not give all the products of the mint to Plato, because the Athens state-owned silver mine entrusted their mint to process the silver ingots produced. Before Plato, this was the largest and most stable business of the mint. Even with Plato, he could not give up this business. First, as an Athenian citizen, he had the obligation to serve the city-state. Second, if it was not compared with Plato, the income from this business was also generous. There were also old customers in the past. Although he had tried his best to turn down unimportant orders, there were still some people he could not offend. Sophonicus had thought about expanding production capacity, but the casting of owl coins required the most exquisite craftsmanship, and it was hard to find a craftsman with such craftsmanship. Most of these free craftsmen had their own shops, and would not work for others. Few slaves were willing to be sold by their owners. Sophonicus could only ask the craftsmen and the mint to quickly take apprentices, but this would not be effective in a short time. Seeing that he could not do a large amount of business, it was too uncomfortable for Sophonicus. Especially when Cerebus would tell him every time he reconciled the accounts, how many people wanted to exchange, and how much money they did not exchange. Every time Cerebus said this, he felt that a large amount of money had grown wings, and flew away from his pocket. You know, what he earned here in Prato was not only the casting fee, but also the generous exchange fee. Sophonicus knew that this would not work without Cerebus urging him. It is not the sailing season yet. When the sailing season comes, Athens will be crowded with sea merchants, and the production capacity of the mint will not be enough. Sophonicus was very surprised. In recent years, the number of sea merchants coming to Athens has indeed increased year by year, but the business is not so good in the off-season. What he didn't know was that Cerebus had invited many hotel waiters to promote the owl coins. In the past, merchants who came to Athens either didn't know about it, or it was inconvenient to exchange it. The potential of the owl coins has not been fully tapped. What Sophonicus didn't know was that the first thing Cerebus did after withdrawing the principal of the exchanged coins from Prato was to buy the land in Prato from the owner. Even if the owner of the house took advantage of the fire, the price he asked was at least a quarter higher than the store next door. In addition to the land in Prato, he also used all the liquid funds he could use to buy all the nearby shops that could be bought, and even borrowed a large loan in order to connect the land together. He wanted to drive up the land prices in this area. The benefits brought by Prato are really considerable, and now it is just the beginning. In order to be on the safe side, he wants to do as much as possible to prevent it. Moreover, Athens is now on the rise. Buying a shop in such a good location at the port is a sure win. Why not? If non-Athenian citizens were not prohibited from purchasing real estate in Athens, the land price here would certainly be even more considerable. People without citizenship have no right to purchase real estate in Athens. The house that Mark Eutylis bought that led to his family's bankruptcy was because Mark Eutylis had not yet formally obtained citizenship when the contract was signed. Those who wanted to seize the property were executed and not recovered. Instead, it was taken over by the city-state. In addition to buying shops, Cerberus put the rest of his energy on hiring employees. In addition to those who had been hired when the business opened, he bought several literate slaves and hired several citizens and sons of citizens to train them carefully. The exchange business gradually got on the right track, and he began to prepare for attracting deposits. Chapter 77. Savings. The citizens hired by Cerberus were mainly taught to distinguish the purity of gold and silver, as well as to do simple accounting. Ancient Greek numbers were very complicated. The ancient Greeks did not have the concept of place value. They used the initial letters of Attic numbers to count, such as 1 equals IO equals L, 5 equals ENTE, 10 equals E equals, 50 equals ENTEE equals, 100 equals ETON equals, and so on. These letters can be repeated 4 times to express different values, such as lines, LLL, LLLL. The many different symbols brought great difficulties to arithmetic operations. Using such numbers to do complex accounts, not to mention whether ordinary people are competent, even Cerberus himself had to spend a lot of energy when reviewing. He did not hesitate to take out Arabic numerals to teach. However, adults in general are slow to accept new knowledge, and they would also have doubts about employers of his age. Cerberus observed that there were no particularly outstanding talents among them, so he did not waste too much energy, but focused on free men and slave boys. Although the gap between the rich and the poor in the Athenian city-state was relatively small, the fourth-class day laborers were the most numerous. Day laborers meant living mainly on the salary earned from working for others, so they were naturally not very wealthy. Therefore, although the law stipulates that parents have the obligation to educate their children and learn a skill, otherwise the children can stop supporting their parents when they are old, most of the children from such families only receive 7 years of basic education before going out to make a living. 7 years of basic education is only enough to learn basic reading, writing and arithmetic, but this is enough for Cerberus, and it can even be said to be the most perfect source of high-quality students. Older and more advanced children will not accept new knowledge completely, and there are so many of these children that he can offer good conditions and can choose carefully. In addition to the sons of citizens, he also bought some underage slaves of varying ages. In the slave market of Athens, there are often well-educated aristocratic slaves for sale. Of course, it is not possible for all employees in Plato to use slaves, but after the operation is gradually standardized, he believes that the loyalty of slaves will be higher than that of free people. After these young men learned Arabic numerals, he carefully taught them accounts. The future business of Plato would definitely not be limited to exchange and savings. He planned to involve lending, remittances, commercial insurance, marine insurance, storage of valuables. These young men were important talent reserves. The sea stirred up by the north wind god was turbulent, and the merchant ships on the sea gradually disappeared. When people covered the outside of the sea with thick himachal, farmers no longer went to work in the frosty fields, and citizens gathered in the blacksmith shops and inns with warm fires to keep warm and chat. Cerberus was ready. He found Sophonicus and asked, "Sophonicus, how is the training of new employees in your mint going? Can they get started?" Sophonicus said, "It's still early. It may take 10 years to make a good craftsman. Even if you only learn to mint owl coins, it will take at least 3 to 5 months." Cerberus frowned and said, "You are using only newcomers, Sophonicus. I told you that you should buy some skilled craftsmen. It will take too much effort. The spring sailing season is coming, and it will delay things." Sophonicus disapproved and said, "You are an ignorant boy. How can craftsmen be bought so easily? And do you know how much a good silversmith costs? There is little business now, so I will ask people to speed up the work and prepare more inventory. The sailing season will not start for more than a month, so it will not delay the business." Cerberus said, "How much can you save?" Starting from the Antistrian month 1, the mint must guarantee a supply of at least 1,500 owl coins to Plato every day, and at least double it in the Hecatombean month 2. What is the mint's current daily production capacity? Sophonicus said, 1,500 owl coins, and it will double again in the Hecatombean month. That's 3 or 4 talents. How can Plato exchange so much money every day? Cerberus said, "This number may not be enough. Don't forget that there will be the Panathenaic festival 4 next year. free, and envoys will come from all the territories. There will be many more foreigners coming to Athens in these 2 sailing seasons than in previous years. There is also the great Dionysian festival in the Elaphipalian month. 5. 1,500 owl coins a day is just a conservative estimate. Sophonicus shook his head repeatedly and said, "That's impossible. Even if all my new slaves are trained, it won't work. The mint's production capacity is not that large. Even if all the new slaves can be put to use, and the workshop is working at full capacity, it can only produce about 1,000 coins a day at most." Cerberus said, "That's far from enough. You have to buy more people, or hire workers." Sophonicus shook his head again and disagreed. "I won't buy anyone else. I can't afford so many slaves. Even if business is good in these 2 sailing seasons, who knows what will happen afterwards? If there are a lot of orders at that time, I will consider hiring workers." Cerberus, "I think you are too optimistic. Exchanging 3 or 4 talents a day, how is that possible?" Cerberus said, "Even after the Panathenaic festival, you don't have to worry about the sales of coins, Sophonicus. I'm sure that no matter how many coins you cast, I can exchange them. I'm very confident about this, otherwise I would not have hired so many people, right? I promise that adding more manpower will only increase your wealth, and will never become a burden to you. Even if the business is really bad at that time, and they become a burden, I'm willing to take over, and will never let you lose money." Sophonicus still shook his head. "Cerberus, isn't it good for us to take it slowly? There is no need for us to take risks at all. This way, we can make a little profit, but will not lose money. This is the right way to do business. I always think that you are too adventurous and expand blindly. Doing business like that is certainly profitable, but what if you lose money?" Cerberus glanced at him and said, "It seems that you are determined to miss this good opportunity, Sophonicus. But I can't miss it. You know how many new people I have hired, and I have to feed them. Since you are unwilling to increase production capacity, I have to think of other ways." Sophonicus was surprised. "Do you have any other ideas?" Cerberus said, "This is my own business." After that, he smiled and said meaningfully, "I do like adventure. It makes my blood boil. Hide the money in a secret place in your home. No matter how much time passes, it will still be limited, and it may even be stolen by thieves. But if you deposit money in our bank, your wealth will grow. In the crowded town square, and in the center of the bustling market, employees of the Prato Bank, which is well known in Athens for its luxurious storefront, stood on the platform in uniform and passionately promoted their new service to people. Savings. Putting money in the bank is still your own money, which can be withdrawn at any time, but it can earn interest. This is a great temptation for people who have never had this concept before. At this time, people have no other way to increase their money, except to invest it in production or lend it out, but not everyone can lend money. If you don't want to invest it in production again, you can only leave it there for nothing. If the Prato Bank can guarantee safety, this service is really attractive. But it is the safety that makes people worry. After all, this is money. What if they don't pay it back after depositing it in the bank? There are many people watching the promotion, and everyone talks about it. After listening to one after another, they repeatedly ask about the measures to ensure safety, but not many people deposit money. After all, there has never been such a thing before, and everyone has doubts. Until a few days later, the people of Alcmaeon's family deposited 3,000 drachmas in Prato in public. No one in Athens would dare to cheat Alcmaeon's family. The number of people depositing money in Plato suddenly increased sharply. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 78. The Swallows Are Coming. Thank you very much, Lucius. Cerberus said. After Lucius deposited money in Prato, he came to thank him in person with gifts. He understood the significance of this deposit, which was equivalent to using the reputation of the Alcmaeon family to endorse him. When Lucius saw him, he thought of his young son who was far away in a foreign land, and said softly, "You are welcome, Cerberus. I'm glad to be able to provide you with some help." You saved my son, and I'm always grateful to you. In fact, he intended to lend a hand when the money changers united to embarrass Cerberus last time, but Cerberus quickly solved the problem himself, and he didn't have time. Cerberus knew that a big family like Alchemian didn't want to owe favors to others, and it would be better to let them repay it. Although he didn't think he had any favors to the Alchemian family, he did it for Halley's, but he couldn't interfere with what others thought. Moreover, even if Lucius did not take action, he had other ways to attract deposits, but his foundation in Athens was too weak, and he really needed the protection of a prestigious family like Alcmaeon. Once the Alcmaeon family showed this attitude, he didn't know how much trouble he would save. After Lucius said this, he didn't say too much, but just kept his gratitude in his heart, waiting for the opportunity to repay in the future. He was also confident that he would give the Alcmaeon family a satisfactory reward. The deposit-taking business was in full swing, and Cerberus had some free time. He did a rigorous job in the early preparations. The process was smooth, and the employees were trained in place. Although there was a new business to be launched, it was not as busy as the training. At that time, he had to sort out the process, train employees, and plan how to launch the new business. He didn't even have time to go to school for a long time. Coincidentally, the Bean Eating Festival, that is, the Bean Option Festival, was coming, and he decided to relax for a day. On the day of the festival, as soon as it gets dark, boys come in groups wearing olive branch crowns wrapped with wool, laughing and knocking on doors from house to house, singing the ballad of the Bean Eating Festival to ask for cakes and wine. The swallows are coming, the swallows are coming, bringing a good season and a good year, with white bellies and black backs. You rich man, quickly bring out the cakes, a jar of good wine, and a basket of cheese, so that the swallows won't destroy your beans and wheat. Are you going to let us go or take it? You have to give it to us. We will remove the door panels and the lintels and snatch the woman sitting in your house. She is petite, and it will not be difficult to take her away. What are you going to bring? Bring something big. Open the door for the swallows. Open the door for the swallows. We are not old people. We are children. After the door of the house was knocked, Gangela, with a rare smile on her face, handed the cakes and dried fruits that had been prepared long ago to the boys, and poured some wine into the pottery jars they brought. They left with a smile, and before leaving, they invited Cerberus to go to other people's houses to beg, but Cerberus declined their kindness. He has been busy with Prato's affairs in the past few months, and Aristides seems to be busy with something too. The two have not seen each other for a long time. He wants to take advantage of today to visit Aristides. After the boys left, Gangela also handed Cerberus an olive branch crown wrapped with wool, and said, "You should go out and play too, Cerberus." Cerberus also wore the olive branch crown, and went out with a smile. He arrived at Aristides' house, and knocked on the door. Aristides came to open the door, and sang in a childish way, "Rich man, bring out the cakes quickly, plus a jar of good wine, and a basket of cheese." Aristides laughed and really gave him a piece of cake and a piece of cheese, and shook the wine jar and said, "Where is your wine jar, the swallow with a white belly and a black back?" Cerberus pointed to his lower abdomen and said, "Here." Aristides smiled happily, and welcomed him in, and the two walked to the fire in the courtyard and sat down. Aristides mixed some light wine, and the two of them talked, while holding their glasses. "You've been very busy lately, Cerberus. You haven't even gone to school." Cerberus said, "After this period of time, I will continue to go to school. But I really don't have time to go to school step by step. I must hire or buy a tutor. Do you have any candidates to recommend?" Aristides shook his head and said, "It's not easy to find someone who can teach you. I asked Angus about your learning progress. Ordinary teachers can't teach you. You also know that truly learned people will not be willing to be tutors. You can only buy a good slave. But this kind of slave is not easy to buy. You'd better say hello to the brokers and let them keep an eye on it for you." Cerberus frowned and said, "That's the only way. Let's not talk about me. What are you busy with recently? It seems you are also very busy." Aristides shook the wine glass and said, "I started to participate in public affairs." Cerberus raised his eyebrows. "Oh." Aristides said, "Cleisthenes recommended me to be an assistant to the Archon of Justice." Cerberus said, "This is a good position. This is equivalent to being a secretary or assistant to the Minister of Justice in later generations. Even if the Archon of Athens rotates every year, it will definitely be an impressive qualification in the future. Aristides said, Cleisthenes' kindness. This year's Archon of Justice is his friend. He wrote a letter of recommendation for me from overseas. I hope I can live up to his expectations and do something good for the city-state. Cerberus said sincerely, I believe you will. This young man in his 20s is the most selfless person Cerberus has ever seen. He is smart, sharp, and determined. Since he is determined to go into politics and has a strong supporter like Cleisthenes, he will definitely achieve great success. Aristides looked at him, but said with a slight reproach, I want to blame you, Cerberus. Although we haven't met recently, I have always known what you have been doing. You put too much thought into business. Your family is not worried about hunger and poverty now, and you are at the age of learning. Why is this so? People should not spend too much time on acquiring extra wealth. Money is enough to maintain life. Too much is a burden to people. You should put your energy into acquiring knowledge. You are a person loved by the gods. Athena has given you wisdom far beyond ordinary people. She must have higher expectations of you, right? Cerberus did not think Aristides was meddling in other people's affairs. He knew that he was completely well-intentioned. At this time, Athens did not encourage people to focus on private affairs. It was believed that devoting themselves to public affairs was the right way. Solon even legislated that, if there were two parties in the city-state arguing, those who did not support either party would lose their citizenship. And considering Cerberus's age, his persuasion was absolutely appropriate. It's just that he didn't know that Cerberus's situation was different, and Cerberus couldn't explain it. Cerberus said seriously, Aristides, please believe me, I have not slackened my study of knowledge. Aristides was still not satisfied, and said, I hope you can use all your energy to study knowledge. Cerberus could not guarantee this, but only told Aristides that the business was temporarily over, and he would shift his focus back to study. Aristides could not force him, so he could only make up his mind to pay more attention to him, even if he was busy in the future, and try to give him some good guidance, so as not to let his mind deviate too much. After the two finished this topic, Cerberus asked Aristides about his work with interest. Aristides hoped to arouse his interest in public affairs, and told him a lot of interesting things. He gave as detailed and clear answers as possible to the places he was interested in and every question, without any perfunctory, because of his young age, and clearly stated that he could not say what needed to be kept secret. Cerberus was still very interested in the operation of the government of this era, and Aristides was quick-witted and his words were never boring. The two talked until late at night and still had a lot of fun. The two ended their conversation only when Gangara sent someone to take Cerberus home. Aristides sent Cerberus out the door. Occasionally, there were playful children on the street, laughing and singing swallow songs. Aristides looked at the figures of those children, and then looked at Cerberus's handsome face under the light of the torch, and said with emotion, Cerb, you are so different from these boys of the same age. I really want to know what kind of person you will be when you grow up. Cerberus smiled and said, just an ordinary person. Aristides affirmed, no, for good or bad, I believe you will be extraordinary in the future. Chapter 79, Wine Press Festival. After the Bean Festival, Cerberus really turned his focus back to studying, and even attended classes for a while like an ordinary child. Of course, his class progress was different. He had already finished Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, and Hesiod's Theogony and Works and Days, and mastered basic reading and writing. These are all the contents that ordinary children need to learn when they receive basic education between the ages of 7 and 13 or 14. Angus has already begun to teach Cerberus grammar and rhetoric. Grammar refers to literature and poetry, rhetoric refers to composition, recitation, and speech. This belongs to the content of secondary education. Above that, there is a higher education that only a few top talents have the opportunity to access, but that will be in the future. This is exactly why it is difficult for Cerberus to find a teacher. In Athens, the social status of secondary education teachers is completely different from that of primary education teachers. People with grammar and rhetoric literacy must be able to occupy a place in public life if they are citizens, or in other words, They must have an extraordinary family background or social status, otherwise they will not have the opportunity to learn these. This meant that these people would not be available to serve as tutors on call, so Cerberus could only buy slaves. But it was conceivable that slaves of this level must be foreign nobles, and there were not so many nobles. If you wanted to buy one in the slave market, you could only wait and try your luck. Although Angus did not know how to speak, he could still teach Cerberus some basic grammar and rhetoric, so Cerberus learned from him first. Compared with other children, Cerberus was not very active in school, but after the Halius incident, Angus paid great attention to cultivating students' virtues such as friendship and open-mindedness, and Aptus was very friendly to him, so he was not rejected. Of course, it was inevitable that they were unfamiliar, but Aptus was very enthusiastic to help him integrate into the group. When talking with friends, he always brought him into the topic and tried to pull him together in everything. Cerberus's mentality also changed a little. He was no longer so repulsive to children, and his relationship with them was closer than before. Although Athens attaches great importance to education, children still have an easy time going to school compared to more than 2000 years later. First of all, the homework is not so numerous. Secondly, there are many festivals in Athens, and they often last for 3 to 5 days or even a whole month. Schools will be closed on such days. There is no new business in Plato recently, so Cerberus can also take care of school. After the Bean Festival, Aristides really did not forget to pay attention to Cerberus, even if he was busy, and squeezed out some time to meet with him every now and then. Sometimes the two just chatted, and sometimes talked about Cerberus' homework. Aristides had received personal instruction from Cleisthenes, and had received 2 years of the best education in Athens at the National Gymnasium. Cerberus' homework was just a piece of cake for him. If Aristides was not really busy, Cerberus would like to ask him to teach him. After seeing Cerberus's ability to learn by analogy, Aristides paid more attention to him and offered to teach him if Angus could no longer teach him and he had not found a suitable teacher. Although Aristides and Cerberus were very different in age, Aristides was older in body, but opposite in mind. They had a lot to talk about, although most of the time it was Aristides who spoke and Cerberus listened. In Cerberus's opinion, Aristides was a very good communication partner. He was smart and sharp, upright but not rigid, and had a strong receptive ability. Most importantly, he regarded Cerberus as an equal communication partner, and was willing to discuss any topic with him sincerely, without despising or perfunctory. People have the desire to communicate. Cerberus has been in ancient Greece for 7 or 8 years, and no one except Aristides would communicate with him like this. Marcutulus was so focused on making money that he had no interest in communicating with his son. Ganga Megana's world was as small as her family. Although it had grown a little recently, it was still too small for Cerberus to communicate with. As for business partners and employees, there was no one who was particularly outstanding, so he wanted to have a deeper relationship with him than cooperation and employment. In Aristides' view, Cerberus was indeed the favorite of the gods. Not only the god of medicine, but also Athena loved him. He didn't talk much, but every time he spoke, he was always sharp and pointed, which made people secretly shocked. Talking with him often gave people the same benefits as talking with Cleisthenes, except that Cleisthenes was wise and knowledgeable about the world, while Cerberus was naturally smart and sharp. Even if there was no other reason, Aristides was willing to associate with such a good friend, because it would make him better. In a blink of an eye, it was the wine press festival. The weather began to warm up, and there were traces of merchant ships on the sea again. The wine press festival in Athens lasted for 3 to 6 days, 3 days in wartime and 6 days in peacetime. There was no war in Athens during this period, so residents from around Athens would rush to the city in horse-drawn carriages early in the morning to participate in the celebration. The first day of the celebration was a grand sacrificial ceremony. The city-state provided sacrifices, and after the sacrifice, the people participating in the ceremony sang hymns to the god of wine, drank and splashed new wine everywhere, and shared the rare meat. Since a day in Athens starts from dusk, the celebration started at night. On the second day, people dressed up as various mythological characters, such as nymphs, holy goddesses, revelers of the Dionysian festival, satyrs, attendants of the god of wine Dionysus, etc., carrying giant penis models, parading and dancing in the streets, telling sharp and even obscene jokes and teasing each other. Afterwards, the theatre of Leni, south of the Acropolis, competed in hymns to the god of wine and Tragicomedis. During the festival, court proceedings were usually suspended. Aristides had some free time and invited Cerberus to watch the tragedy together. When the two of them went out and walked towards Lenane, they met several groups of people who were competing in drinking. They set up temporary lounge chairs on the street and drank from their cups, lying or sitting on them. The whole city of Athens seemed to be immersed in the aroma of wine. Some people got excited and stood up to dance with exaggerated movements to the music. Due to the style of their clothes, the more intense movements often exposed the private parts of the body, which was very indecent. Others were completely drunk, crying and laughing, and being unrestrained, which was very different from the city's usual gentle temperament. Cerberus watched with interest this interesting custom that would never be seen in later generations. Although there were many festivals in Athens, he rarely had the opportunity to participate. Festivals were good opportunities to do business. In the past, he had to help out with his family's bread business, but he had no time and no one to take him to participate. After Marcutulus joined the army, he had even less time to participate. It was rare for him to have the opportunity to walk leisurely on the street. Aristides was a strict person, but he was dissatisfied with such indulgence. He led him around these people and frowned and said, "Joy should be moderate, not abandon reason. Our city-state is too crazy about the worship of Dionysus." Cerberus had a different view on this. People cannot always remain rational, and it is scientific to let people release their accumulated emotions safely on fixed festivals. However, the Athenians did worship Dionysus a little too much. There were 4 festivals about Dionysus in a year, and each of them was a big celebration. The wine press festival was already the smallest one among them. Not long before the wine press festival, there was a rural Dionysus festival. In the past month, it was the Ancestorian festival to celebrate the opening of new wine jars, and in another month, it was a city Dionysus festival. The city Dionysus festival was the second largest celebration of the year after the Athena festival. Another group of drinkers passed by, and a man was dancing to celebrate the grape harvest with the accompaniment of a harp. He imitated the movements of picking grapes, carrying a basket, carrying wine, and finally tasting new wine. It was so lifelike that Cerberus seemed to see bunches of grapes, wine presses, and rows of wine barrels, and it seemed that he really saw him tasting new wine. After he finished dancing, he picked up the wine glass and laughed and returned to the lounge chair. Another man jumped up, ordered the harp player to change the song, and danced himself. This dance was rarely seen by Cerberus. The dance was rough and bold, and many of the movements were naked sexual innuendos. Aristides seemed to know this person, and said in surprise, "Daphnis, this is too undignified." He immediately took Cerberus back, and took another road. Cerberus asked curiously, "Who is that?" Aristides said, "It's the city-state's property public sales officer." "This is really..." Cerberus wisely didn't say that he thought the man danced very well. The two arrived at the theater and each paid 2 opoles for a ticket to enter. The performance had not yet begun. Many vendors were selling their goods between the rows of seats. There were nuts, raisins, dried figs, hairbands, daffodil wreaths, ivy wreaths, Bacchus staffs, everything. Aristides and Cerberus each bought a Bacchus staff with ivy wrapped around the body and a pine cone on the top. The vendor selling Bacchus staffs recognized Cerberus and asked him to touch his left leg, which always hurt on cloudy days. He gave him a daffodil wreath and Aristides an ivy wreath. After the vendor left, the two put the wreaths on their heads. Cerberus looked around the theater and saw that almost half of the people were wearing wreaths like them. Cerberus asked Aristides, "What play is being performed today?" Aristides said, "It's Platinum's new play, The Shepherds." As the two were talking, a young man about the same age as Aristides called him from behind. "Aristides." Aristides turned around and said happily, "Aeschylus, you're here too." Chapter 80 Watching a play. Cerberus also turned around. Aeschylus' eyes lit up and he praised, "Oh, son of the gods. Your beauty is like a flame that can illuminate the night sky. This daffodil wreath really complements your black hair." Cerberus knew that it was common to compliment the appearance of the same sex at this time, so he politely replied, "Thank you." Aeschylus walked to their row and sat down next to Cerberus. He spoke to Aristides across him and said, Aristides, I heard people say that you were courting the beautiful son of the gods. I didn't believe it at first, thinking it was just an unfounded rumor. You are still at the age of being loved, and the son of the gods is even more childish, not even old enough to be loved. But now that I see him, I believe some of these rumors. He is so handsome. His hair is so black and soft, like the myrtle. His skin is like white lilies. His black eyes are as bright and moving as the stars in the night sky, and his eyelashes, each one of them is like a sharp arrow piercing the heart. And his nose is so straight, like the snow-capped peak of Mount Olympus. His lips are the color of the most delicate petals in spring, and I believe they will taste as sweet as nectar when kissed. He is a descendant of the three graces, and was raised by the goddess Cyprus among roses. I would not be surprised if you fell in love with him. Cerberus was thinking about the word pursue when he was caught off guard by a wave of exaggerated and corny compliments. He shuddered and reminded with a little displeasure, Aeschylus, I'm a boy, your compliments are not appropriate, right? Aeschylus asked puzzledly, why, am I offensive? Aristides also looked at him a little strangely. Cerberus immediately realized that his ideas were different from his. He paused and said, I think that when praising a man, we should praise his masculinity, not his beauty, right? Of course, I'm younger, but this should not be a reason for me to be despised. Aeschylus was surprised and said, my dear Cerberus, how can you have such a strange idea? How can praising a man's beauty be detrimental to his dignity? Beauty is a treasure bestowed by the immortal gods to very few lucky people. All men want beauty, but only you, the very few lucky ones, can get it. You are the happiest people in the world, because your beauty can make you respected by both gods and people. It is because of your beauty that Pelops was able to sit at the table of the gods and share the nectar with them, and Ganymede was taken to heaven by Zeus, the chief of the gods. Even Zeus was worried that his appearance was not enough to please his beloved, so he changed himself into another more beautiful person. And you, who are born with a handsome face, are the grace of the gods to you. You should enjoy the praise to your heart's content. Why do you think this is detrimental to your dignity? This is the honor that beauty has won for you. Aristides nodded in agreement and said, that's right, Cerberus. Manliness will not be compromised by physical beauty. The human body is the most symmetrical, harmonious, dignified and beautiful creature in the world. You should be proud of your beauty, Cerberus. He had a new understanding of the ancient Greeks' pursuit of beauty. This was no longer a theory, but rose to the height of philosophy and worldview. The performance was about to begin, and Aeschylus returned to the seat of his own village community. The tickets they bought had the names of their respective villages on them. The seats in the theater were very particular. The wedge-shaped seats closest to the stage and the fan-shaped audience seats belonged to the employees of 10 government departments. Cerberus sat here with Aristides. The circle behind the wedge-shaped seats belonged to the members of the 500-person citizen assembly. The outer layer was the seats for citizens of each village community, and the outermost was the seats for visitors from Athens' vassal territories, expatriates living in Athens, and foreigners to watch the play. All these seats were divided into 10 areas according to the village community, and most of the time people sat strictly according to the seating order. Those who understand the rules can tell who holds what position in the city-state, just by looking at the seats. This is the largest open-air theater in Athens, which can seat at least 5,000 people. From the farthest position from the stage, the people on the stage are just a black dot, but thanks to the superb architectural standards, even from such a position, the sound of a coin falling on the stage can be heard clearly. Before the performance, the priests of Dionysus first slaughtered the suckling pigs that were sent to the theater by the parade yesterday, and sprinkled the blood around the stage to sacrifice to the gods. Then the king's archon came on stage, used wine to drink to the gods again, and then gave a passionate speech, enthusiastically praising the citizens who had contributed to the city-state in the past year, saying their names one by one, and awarding them laurel wreaths. This was a glorious moment for many citizens, and the atmosphere in the theater was boiling. After that, finally a dozen people dressed in animal skins, holding whips, and dressed like shepherds came on stage. They looked like actors. However, the actors did not start performing immediately after they came on stage. The leader introduced himself first. I'm Platinus, a citizen of the Palerns community. Then he introduced his companions. This is Diphilus, a citizen of the area community, and this is Pausanias, a citizen of the Paeonia community. Thanks to the generous sponsorship of the respectable citizen Lalicus of the Palerns community, today we present to the citizens my new tragedy the shepherds created for the Linnaea Dionysia festival. Please enjoy it. Then the performance officially began. Ancient Greek tragedies are well known. Cerebius also watched Oedipus Rex and Prometheus Bound in later generations. He thought he would see a wonderful performance similar to a drama, but the actors started singing with the accompaniment of music. The actors sang in unison, the leader sang alone, and the leader sang with other actors. The words were gorgeous, the metaphors were numerous, and the tunes were beautiful and pleasant. The style of the music was very similar to Homer's epics. Occasionally, the leader would speak a few monologues as a character in the play, but the monologues were also in strict rhythm, like poetry. Cerberus was a little surprised, and a little doubtful, whether what he saw was a tragedy. It was very different from the tragedies he saw in later generations. However, the actors' voices were very beautiful and the stories they told were very interesting. He watched with interest. The actors sang about a king named Icarius, who learned to grow grapes and brew fine wine from the god of wine. He brewed wine for a group of shepherds to drink. However, the shepherds lost control after drinking and killed him. The person who wrote the lyrics was very talented and portrayed the protagonist's fateful and tragic fate in a gripping way. Although it was performed in the form of singing, the core was in line with those famous tragedies that were passed down to later generations. Cerberus was a little doubtful that this was an early form of tragedy. The performance time of the tragedy was 2 performances in the morning and 1 in the afternoon, plus a comic performance as a change, called the Sheepman play. The works of the same author were performed on the same day, and the protagonist of the Goatman play was usually also the protagonist of the tragedy. After the intermission of the first scene, the audience took out the wine, bread, olives, fruits, etc. they brought, and ate and drank. Cerberus and Aristides also bought 2 glasses of wine from the vendor, who took the opportunity to enter the theater again to sell. Aeschylus took this opportunity to come to them again and asked, Aristides, what do you think of Platinus' tragedy? Aristides said, it is very well written. Aeschylus frowned and said, you are so short-sighted, Aristides. This Shepherds is far inferior to the play I wrote. Platinus is just famous, and there are also Flunicus and Coerulus. These 2 are far inferior to me, but they are older and more famous. But the people on the committee chose the 3 of them to compete, just because of their fame. The tragedy competition of the Athens festival only selects 3 contestants to participate in the competition to decide the champion, runner-up and 3rd place, and they didn't even listen to me read the script. Aristides said with a bit of amusement, but I heard from the people on the committee that you were ejected because the tragedy you created is very weird, and there are many actors talking to each other. Aeschylus said unconvincedly, there are not many, only 2. If they listen to me patiently, they will know that I have created a new form of tragedy. These 2 actors can make the performance more exciting. Aristides could not imagine what it would be like for 2 actors to talk to each other on the stage, and shrugged in comprehension. Cerberus looked at Aeschylus in surprise. If this man really created a new form of tragedy in which actors talk on the stage as he said, then compared with the current form, it would definitely be a big leap. If his literary talent is as good as he said, he might be a great figure who will be remembered in history. Cerberus recalled his name, and felt that it sounded very much like Aeschylus, one of the 3 great tragedy masters. Thinking about the time period, it also fits. He looked at him with a strange look. Aeschylus defended his work. He saw Cerberus, and dragged him into the dispute, saying, Son of God, tell me, if the performance of tragedy is not only singing, but also someone acting out the scenes in the plot on the stage, would you like it more? Cerberus smiled and nodded, of course I would like it more. Aeschylus said proudly, you see, even children understand the superiority of this form of performance. Aristides smiled and said, Cerberus is not an ordinary child. Aeschylus, if you want everyone to accept your innovation, it is better to perform it directly, and let everyone compare it. If it is indeed better than the original, everyone will naturally accept it. Aeschylus was stunned for a moment, thought about it and said, "You are right, Aristides." After that, he left thoughtfully. Sebas watched him leave and said, "I'm looking forward to his work." Aristides smiled and said, "You make me look forward to it too." The second performance began soon, singing about the death of King Icarius. His daughter Irigone, led by her loyal dog Mera, found her father's body. She was so heartbroken that she hanged herself. Dionysus was furious and made everyone in the shepherd's village suffer from depression and hang themselves one by one. The villagers were afraid and asked the girl to swing on a swing to ask for forgiveness from Dionysus. From then on, every time during the Dionysian festival of Amphistoria, Greek girls would participate in a swinging ceremony, the Irigone swing, to commemorate Irigone. Cerebius was shocked. Athens' ban on women was even stricter than that of ancient China. Only on very few festivals could women be seen on the streets. During the Dionysian festival of Amphistoria, girls could be seen swinging on a swing pushed by men dressed as goat men. He originally thought that this was a festival similar to China's Qingming festival or Shangyuan festival, but he didn't expect the truth to be so unexpected. The cultural differences between the East and the West are really huge. Chapter 81, Marcutelis, Part 1. Cerberus originally thought that the atmosphere of boys and girls swinging together on the swings during the Amphistoria festival was happy and sexy, but he didn't expect that there was such a sad origin. He said to Aristides in silence, "This is how the Irigone swing came about." Aristides said with a little smile in his voice, "It's a bit scary, isn't it?" Cerberus felt that sometimes he really didn't know how to evaluate the ancient Greeks. While the two were talking, Harris, a citizen son of 15 or 16 hired by Plato, suddenly came over in a hurry and said, "Cerebius, go back quickly. Something happened to your family. Your father's leg was broken by a horse." Marcutelis was dying, lying on the bed in the public doctor's clinic, with one leg covered with black and yellow ointment. He asked fearfully, "Doctor, is this medicine useful? My leg still hurts a lot." The dark and strong public doctor, who looked like a butcher, said in a very uneasy tone, "Don't worry, it works very well. This is elderberry mud, a kind of sacred tree, which can cure any disease." Marcutelis's voice suddenly became higher. Because of Cerberus, he knew a lot about elderberry, and knew that many serious bone injuries could not be cured by elderberry, and he was not comforted at all. He was stationed at the guard post, and the training officer took his beloved horse there. In his spare time, the training officer asked him if he wanted to learn to ride a horse. He was willing to do so. Once when he dismounted, he accidentally fell and was stepped on by the horse. He regretted it very much in his heart, not because he was careless. In fact, he was injured on purpose, but he didn't expect to be injured so badly. It was all the fault of that damn horse. He originally planned to pretend to fall when dismounting and get a little injured, but after he fell, the horse came over and stepped on him. In the past 2 years, his luck has turned. Even though he joined the army to serve, his family's business is still thriving. People who joined the army at the same time are very envious of him. Even the training officer who looked down on them as a group of new citizens has a different eye for him. Recently, he even allowed him to touch his horse. The horse is the closest companion of the soldier and a symbol of status. Allowing him to touch his horse is a very intimate gesture of goodwill. But Marcutelis has been very worried recently, if for nothing else, just for the family business. Because someone sent him a message that his son Cerberus was messing around at home and wasting money. He set up a bank and invested all the money earned by the family. He also borrowed a large sum of money. However, the business he did was impossible to make money. After Marcutelis asked the slave sent by his family to visit him to verify this, he felt so sad. Every penny in the family belonged to him. What did Gangira do for a living? He let an 8 or 9-year-old child waste his money. He asked the slave to send a message to Gangira, ordering her to stop her son's wasteful behavior, but he was still restless. He was afraid that Gangira would indulge her son, and he was also afraid that the situation was irreversible. After he retired and returned, his family would be ruined and penniless again. But he was in the army and could not do anything. Just when he was anxious, his companions chatted in their spare time and talked about a citizen who was injured and retired. He thought, isn't this a perfect reason to desert? Question mark? As long as he got injured, he could go home and manage his own business. So he immediately planned this matter. But he really didn't expect that damn horse to come over. If he had known, he would have used other methods. His leg pain was really severe. He would not be disabled or even lose his life. Ganjura arrived at the clinic earlier than Cerberus. Seeing that his wife did not have the joy of reunion after a long separation, Marcoutilis blamed her for not taking good care of her son, which led to his injury. He first said angrily, "Where is Cerberus? My father is injured like this. Isn't he the son of God? Where is he?" Ganjura explained, "He is not at home. I have asked someone to find him, and he will be here soon." Marcoutilis said unhappily, "Hurry him up. I'm in so much pain. Let him come and touch me." Ganjura told Meghana, who came with her, to find Cerberus again. Not long after Meghana left, she ran into Cerberus, who hurried here, and the two returned together. Marcoutilis groaned and said, "Ouch, it hurts so much. Cerberus, please touch my leg." Cerberus stepped forward and gently placed his hand on his wound, and asked Ganjura, "How is it?" Marcoutilis was not the only patient in the clinic. Cerberus was a celebrity in Athens. As soon as he walked in, people whispered, "The son of God. He helped my wife cure mumps. Let's ask him to touch us later. Let's see if he can cure his father first." The public doctor stared at him with interest as soon as he entered the door and rushed to answer, "It's just a fracture, pretty boy. I have applied elderberry ointment to him. He will recover, but he just needs to lie still for a while. A fracture cannot be cured by applying some ointment." Cerberus frowned and observed Marcoutilis's injured leg. The place where the ointment was applied could not be seen, but the knee and ankle were red and swollen like steamed buns. The position of Marcoutilis' injury was in the middle of his calf. A fracture in this place must have the broken bone straightened. I wonder if the doctor, who looked like a butcher, had done it right. With their level of not being able to cure even dislocations, Cerberus was really worried and said to Marcoutilis, "Father, I want to touch your bones. Please bear with it." Then he said to the doctor, "Please help me, hold my father down, and don't let him move." He asked Ganjura to hold the knee of Marcoutilis' injured leg tightly, and he squeezed hard along his calf bone. After Cerberus put his hand on his leg, Marcoutilis felt that it seemed that the pain was not as bad as before. He believed very much in his son's healing power. He had seen Cerberus cure many diseases such as mumps, colds and fevers, which can be cured without treatment after a period of time. As for those who were not cured by Cerberus, Marcoutilis believed that they must be not devout in their faith in God. As for himself, he was sure that he was very pious, otherwise the god of medicine would not have bestowed God's grace on his son. Cerberus pinched him hard, and he wanted to roll on the bed in pain, but he was held down tightly and could not move at all. He could only scream loudly. Cerberus pinched his shin bone and found that he should have only fractured it, and the bone was not completely broken, so he breathed a sigh of relief. Nowadays, if a bone is really broken, 9 out of 10 times the life will be lost, and disability is a small matter. He looked at the sturdy and dark public doctor differently. No wonder he dared to boast that Marcoutilis would recover. If he was not talking nonsense, then he really had some skills. Cerberus loosened his hand and signaled the doctor and Ganjura to let go of Marcoutilis. The public doctor asked Cerberus with great interest, "Pretty boy, what did you touch?" Chapter 80 to Conspiracy. Cerberus said, "It's nothing. I just want to see how serious the injury is. Doctor, my father's leg is like this. Doesn't it need any other treatment?" The public doctor asked, "What else can be done? Medicine has been applied. Just wait for it to heal slowly." Cerberus said a little speechlessly, "I think there can be something else that can be done." After that, he asked the young man who accompanied him to go to the carpenter to get 2 long boards, tie them to Marcoutilis' broken leg with ropes, and make a simple splint. Everyone in the clinic looked at them curiously. When he finished, the public doctor asked with interest, "What is this for?" Cerberus said, "Fix it to prevent the fracture from moving." The public doctor pulled the rope and praised, "This is a good idea." He asked Marcoutilis, "How do you feel?" Marcoutilis nodded repeatedly. "It hurts less than before, and I can move my leg a little." There was another patient with a fracture in the clinic. Hearing this, he quickly asked, "Doctor, tie it up for me too. Tie it up for me too." The public doctor asked his assistant to find a wooden board, and other patients asked Cerberus to touch it. Cerberus was too lazy to explain that he had no healing power for so many years, so he touched everyone. Even the public doctor claimed that he had a toothache and asked him to touch it. Although Marcutulus's injured leg was applied with medicine, it was still swollen. He was afraid of getting a fever, so he stayed in the clinic for observation. Gangula was a woman and could not show her face for a long time. Cerberus had other things to deal with. The two left a slave to take care of Marcutulus and left. On the way home, Cerberus was thinking about things. In his opinion, Marcutulus' leg injury was not serious, but with the medical technology of this era, it was hard to say what would happen. He had to be prepared for Marcutulus to retire due to injury. Marcutulus had 1 year left in his service. He had many plans for business, but now it was difficult to implement them. According to his understanding of Marcutulus, if he retired and went home, he would definitely intervene in the business and even try to take everything into his own hands. Cerberus certainly didn't want to let his hard work be used for others, not to mention that Marcutulus had no ability at all. None of the businesses he had now could be taken down by Marcutulus. But the trouble was Marcutulus's identity. In this patriarchal society, he was not an adult. In theory, all the wealth in this family belonged to Marcutulus, and he had the right to make any disposal. He had originally planned to use this year to train his own people and make some arrangements so that he could limit Marcutulus when he retired. Now all the plans were disrupted. He had to temporarily put some things on hold and make arrangements to deal with the possible situations that might arise after Marcutulus recovered. In a remote location in the central market, Pyrrhus, a peddler selling dried fish, was guarding a basket of fish. He had not sold many fish when the sun went down, and after the market was over, he had no choice but to carry the heavy basket of fish back home. When he entered the house, his wife came to greet him. She looked at the basket of fish, her heart sank, and she asked, "Is business not good today?" Pyrrhus put the basket of fish on the ground, poured a glass of wine, and sat on the steps at the door of the house to drink it in a depressed mood. His wife put the fish basket into the storeroom, hesitated for a moment, then walked to his side and said, "We can't go on like this, otherwise we should go back to the business of exchanging coins." Pyrrhus said impatiently, "If we can do it, do I need you to tell me? It is very difficult to exchange coins in the mint now." Sophonisco said that the great Dionysus, city Dionysus festival, and the Panathenaic festival are coming, and the city-state has entrusted a large order. It will take at least 3 or 4 months without the spare capacity to supply goods to us retail customers. We have been waiting for so long. What's more, there is that damn Prato, which has almost snatched away all the customers. If we don't change our business, are we going to starve to death? The wife asked, "Since the mint is not supplying goods, how can we still do the business in Prato?" Pyrrhus snorted coldly, "Prato, huh? That's Sophonisco's own store. You also know how much profit there is in it. How can Sophonisco bear to cut off his own goods? So, he actually wants to make the money for himself and not do business with us anymore?" His wife suddenly realized. "You just realized it? Otherwise, why would I change my job?" Pyrrhus said irritably. "Damn Sophonicus, he is so rich, why doesn't he leave a living for others?" His wife cursed. Who would complain about too much money? Sophonicus didn't know how much profit there was in the past, and he didn't have the manpower. This time, the idiot kid with money, who had nowhere to spend, helped him take care of everything and delivered it to his door. Why didn't he take it? This time, his wife turned her curse to the baker's son, who was looking for trouble. If he complained about too much money, why didn't he just throw it on the street and ruin other people's livelihood for no reason? But cursing was useless. This good business could not be done. Pyrrhus thought of the good old days and hated the baker's son. He prayed that the plan would succeed and he would vent his anger. When the atmosphere in the courtyard was gloomy, Synopsis, a former colleague of Pyrrhus who had been forced to change his career, came to visit him. Pyrrhus' wife retreated to the room, and Synopsis said to him excitedly, "Pyrrhus, do you know that the Euboean bread seller had his leg broken by a horse? Really broken?" Pyrrhus was surprised and said, "I underestimated him. This Euboean countryman is very courageous." but in this case, our original plan cannot be implemented. Synopsis was also a person who could not continue his business due to the squeeze of Prato. He hated the new citizen Marcutulus family. The two former competitors joined forces with several other colleagues and planned to teach Marcutulus family a lesson. Among the new citizens who joined the army with Marcutuli, one was Synopsis' former protector, who was still very flattering to him. They used this person to formulate a revenge plan. All businessmen love money. They first spread the news that Marcutulus's family fortune has been almost squandered by his son. Then they asked the man to tell Marcutulus several stories about certain citizens who retired due to illness or injury, no longer had to train hard for garrison, and went home to live a comfortable life. They secretly expressed their envy of these people and even hinted that certain injuries or illnesses were probably fake. They wanted to encourage Marcutulus to pretend to be sick or injured and request to retire. They even arranged to bribe the doctor to pretend to agree to make a false testimony for Marcutulus so that he could request to retire due to injury. Then they would expose this matter and give this hateful Ubian a big blow. Evading military service and evading war are the same crimes. Marcutulus is a new citizen, and this can expel him from the city-state and confiscate his property. Marcutulus was indeed encouraged, but he was unexpectedly so cruel to himself. He really broke his leg in order to retire. In this way, their plan could not go on. Verus asked unwillingly, did anyone see him when he was injured? Is there any way to prove that he hurt himself on purpose? Synopsis shook his head and said, I asked, and my protected person said that many people saw it at the time. He pretended very well. It may not be easy to prove that he hurt himself on purpose. Verus said depressedly, then let him go. Synopsis smiled mysteriously and said meaningfully, who said to let him go? He was too cruel to himself. You know, such a serious injury like a broken bone can easily lead to death. If he dies, his son is underage. The city-state will definitely entrust a citizen to take care of such a large family business, right? By then, Verus was shocked. You mean? Synopsis smiled and added, Marcutulus's family business is now at least 2 or 3 talents, and he has only one son who is less than 10 years old. Who knows if such a young child can live to adulthood? Chapter 83, Poisoning. As expected, Marcutulus had a fever, but it was only a low-grade fever. It was normal for people with bone injuries to have a low-grade fever a few days ago. The public doctor had seen this many times, so he didn't pay much attention to it. He just told his slaves to apply a cool towel to his forehead and rub his limbs. A few days later, the redness and swelling of Marcutulus' injured leg subsided a lot, and his body temperature almost returned to normal. But just when the public doctor wanted to ask him to go home and recuperate slowly, that is, on the 5th day after his injury, Marcutulus suddenly had a fever again for some reason. His limbs were cold, his whole body was sweating, and he felt nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, diarrhea, and convulsions. Cerberus was called over by the panicked slaves and was shocked. He asked the public doctor, Doctor, how could this happen? Didn't your temperature drop yesterday? Didn't you say you could go home? Before Cerberus came, the public doctor had already forced Marcutulus to drink a lot of soups made from strange herbs, but he vomited them all out, and it didn't work at all. He shrugged and said, sometimes it happens that, if the patient with a broken bone only has a low fever, and can slowly go down, he will recover. But if they have a high fever like this, it's very dangerous. But even though he said that, he was very confused about it. It's true that many patients with broken bones died of high fever, but the symptoms of those people were very different from those of Marcutulus. Those people usually had a fever that didn't subside after being injured, and their temperature kept rising, and finally they died. No one's temperature had already subsided, and then suddenly had a fever. And those people's affected parts would stagnate and fester, but the swelling on Marcutulus' leg had obviously disappeared. Cerberus guessed that the situation the public doctor said was that the patient had an infection. He removed the splint on Marcutulus' leg and asked the slave to fetch a basin of water to wash the mud. He found that the redness and swelling on Marcutulus' leg had indeed subsided. Although there was still black and purple bruises on the injured part, it was definitely not an infection. Could it be that the inflammation caused the disease elsewhere in the body? After all, Cerberus was not a doctor, and he was helpless in this situation. They could only mix honey and salt water and let Marcutalis drink a lot to prevent him from dehydration. Marcutalis would vomit after drinking, and Cerberus would let him drink again after vomiting. Marcutalis fearfully grabbed Cerberus's hand and begged him, "Cerberus, save me, aren't you the son of God? Use your healing power to save your father." Cerberus didn't know what to do. Cerberus had no respect for this bread vendor who lived more than 500 years ago. After the incident, when he was almost sold by him, he had always been wary of him. When the wool business was just starting out, there was a shortage of manpower, and sometimes he had to go out alone with him. He even picked up a piece of broken iron and sharpened one end to hide it on his body, ready to use it to cut Marcutalis' throat if he made any unusual moves. But before he came of age, their family really couldn't do without Marcutalis. In Athens, women not only had no citizenship rights, but also no property rights. He had no right to dispose of property as he was not yet an adult. If Marcutalis died now, he would immediately lose control of all his family's properties. The city-state would take everything away, appoint someone to manage on their behalf, and only give Gandhara some property to sustain life every year, which would not be returned until Cerberus came of age. Who knows if these properties will return to him intact by then. And until Cerberus came of age, if Marcutalis was not there, the city-state had the right to take away any business he ran. Cerberus couldn't stand not being able to take control for so long, and having to rely on others for everything. But he was not a doctor, nor did he really have the power to heal. Apart from feeding Marcutalis with honey and salt water, he didn't know what else he could do. Seeing that Marcutalis was twitching more and more and gradually losing consciousness, the public doctor suggested, "Why not bleed him?" Cerberus disagreed. "Blooding will not work," the public doctor said, "but there is no other way." Marcutalis vomited the honey and salt water he had drunk before. The slave who was taking care of him asked, "Little master." The master vomited again. "What should I do?" Cerberus said, "Let him drink again." The slave tried to feed him, but couldn't. Cerberus asked the slave to force him to drink. Marcutalis was awakened by choking and said breathlessly, "Don't let me drink this anymore. I want to urinate." The slave immediately helped him urinate. But he couldn't urinate, and he kept humming in discomfort. Cerberus thought that he had vomited all the water and didn't drink it, or that he was dehydrated and couldn't urinate. He wanted him to drink water, but he refused to drink it and said, "I'm almost dying. I haven't been able to urinate since last night. It's so uncomfortable to drink water." Cerberus was stunned and said, "Why didn't you say it earlier?" He thought of his kidneys from Marcutalis' inability to urinate. He was wondering if he had kidney problems, but suddenly he remembered that Marcutalis was vomiting and having diarrhea, so he asked hurriedly, "Father, what did you eat yesterday?" Marcutalis said, "Just the food you sent. Fish, cheese, wine. What else?" Cerberus asked the public doctor, "Did my father take any medicine yesterday?" The public doctor said, "Except for elderberry soup, nothing else." Cerberus asked, "Are the dregs of the medicine still there?" The public doctor said, "It fell on the side of the street." "What are you suspecting?" Cerberus said, "Can I go and see it?" Without saying anything, the public doctor took him out to the place where the clinic often dumped the medicine residue, pointed to a bunch of boiled elderberry branches and leaves, and said, "This is it. In addition to your father, there is another citizen who has a fracture here, and the medicine for both of them was boiled together." Cerberus picked up the branches and leaves and smelled them, but couldn't smell anything. Moreover, someone drank the same medicine as Marcutalis, and they didn't have any problems, so it shouldn't be the medicine. Cerberus and the doctor returned to the clinic and checked Marcutalis' nails and eyelids again. Still didn't see anything abnormal, but still said to the public doctor, "Doctor, don't you think my father's symptoms are very similar to poisoning?" The public doctor disagreed. What kind of poison would make people have fever, diarrhea, and can't urinate? People who are poisoned will have cramps, abdominal pain, bleeding from the mouth and nose, and soon die. This is not the case. But seeing that Marcutalis' symptoms were getting worse and worse, and there was no other way, Cerberus decided to try to treat it as poisoning. In this era of lack of medical care and backward medical skills, it was still unknown what kind of poison Marcutulis had been poisoned with, and the only detoxification method Cerberus could think of was gastric lavage. Although Marcutulis had vomited so much that he should have vomited everything in his stomach, Cerberus still asked the slave to feed Marcutulis boiled water and then induce vomiting. Marcutulis had already vomited so much without inducing. If it was in the east, Marcutulis could drink some mung bean water to detoxify, but there were no mung beans here, so Cerberus found some milk instead and fed him alternately with boiled water. The public doctor saw that Marcutulis was tormented like this, and he felt a little sympathetic, and said to Cerberus, "If you insist on saving your father by poisoning, I have a way here that may be of some use." He asked Cerberus to buy expensive soapy water, and also found a cactus, to peel out the flesh inside, and mash it into a paste, and mixed it with soapy water, to give Marcutulis an enema. After all this nonsense, Marcutulis' symptoms gradually eased. Chapter 84, Detoxification. Maybe he has a stomach upset. My method is also useful for treating people with stomach upsets. The public doctor still didn't believe that Marcutulis was poisoned. Cerberus disagreed with his judgment. Will a stomach upset cause convulsions and inability to urinate? The public doctor was speechless. Cerberus checked the food that Marcutulis had eaten. All of them were sent by slaves from home. The family members were fine after eating them, which meant that it should not be a problem with the food itself. Cerberus asked the slave who had touched the food when he handed it to Marcutulis, and whether he had let the food out of his sight. The slave replied in panic that he had not touched anyone, but sometimes he would put the food that he did not finish for one meal and continue to eat it for the next meal. Especially for wine, he would take enough for one day each time and put the unfinished wine on the shared table at the foot of the bed. The wards of the clinic were open spaces with several people in each room. Patients, family members, slaves, and doctor's assistants came and went, and anyone could touch it. Cerberus took the wine jar and smelled it, and took a small sip. There was no strange smell. He handed the wine jar to the public doctor, who checked it, and found nothing wrong. Fish and cheese are not easy to be poisoned. If someone poisoned, they would definitely choose to put it in the wine. But the wine was fine, so how did Marcutulis get poisoned? Cerberus was confused. Unable to figure out the source of the poison, he changed direction and started to investigate from the perspective of interpersonal relationships. Who would want to poison Marcutulis? Who has a grudge against him? Or who can benefit from his death? Marcutulis was still conscious after his symptoms were relieved. Cerberus asked him softly, "Father, have you offended anyone recently?" Marcutulis thought about it carefully and replied, "No." He had been wandering alone in a foreign land since he was a teenager. Caution has been engraved in his bones. Although he is a little profit-seeking, he will never offend anyone easily who would hate him so much that he wants to kill him. Cerberus also knew the character of Marcutulis very well. Although he was arbitrary at home and regarded his wife and children as vassals, he was willing to kowtow to outsiders, even if they were just customers who came to buy a loaf of bread. He should not have such a deep hatred with others. What about the conflict of interest? Who will benefit after Marcutulis' death? After thinking of this, Cerberus was suddenly shocked and found that this was probably an unprovoked disaster that he had brought to Marcutulis. Although Marcutulis had never offended anyone, he had squeezed many competitors out of business. Plato almost destroyed the business of all money changers in Athens. Cutting off someone's wealth is like killing their parents. He has always been on guard against these people's revenge. But he originally thought that these people would tamper with the loan, set traps, or simply violently attack him after he started the loan business. He didn't expect that they would actually be ruthless to Marcutulis. But thinking about it carefully, this is really a brilliant move. Once Marcutulis dies, he will immediately lose control of all his industries and will no longer be a threat to anyone, and this period of time will be at least nearly 10 years. Since he has eliminated the threat and relieved his breath, why not do it? With a direction, Cerberus knew where to investigate. He pretended that he really couldn't find any clues and had to give up, and privately asked the slaves to dig up the details of the patients who came in and out of the clinic these days. This is not an easy task, because the slave who took care of Marcutulis was a foreigner who had been sold to Athens not long ago, and Marcutulis was not a local, so he couldn't figure out the complicated relatives among the locals. Fortunately, although it was not easy, after a few days, the slaves still locked onto a more suspicious person, Zami, the younger brother of the wife of the money changer Pyrrhus. This person claimed that he had a stomachache and stayed in the clinic for a day. The public doctor couldn't find the cause of his illness, and he got better inexplicably and left. This man was not in the same ward as Marcutulis, but he stayed in their room when he was in the clinic. He also claimed that his wine was very good and enthusiastically invited everyone to drink a glass, including Marcutulis. But what was more difficult to explain was that everyone drank wine, but only Marcutulis was poisoned. And this man was discharged from the hospital 2 days ago. Could there be any poison that took effect 2 days later? Cerberus asked the public doctor, who said he had never heard of it. He asked Aristides again, and Aristides also told him that he had never heard of it. Things seemed to be in a dilemma again, and Cerberus changed direction again, and began to check whether Pyrrhus, his wife, or any of his friends were good friends with people who knew some medical skills. This time he got a very unexpected result. Pyrrhus himself was a good friend of a Thessalian wizard nicknamed Mole. Wizard? Cerberus heard this Attic word for the first time, and didn't understand its meaning. The slave said in fear, "Yes, I heard that this man can use talismans to curse people and make them die. The master must have been cursed by this man." Cerberus understood and laughed. Can a person who is harmed by a curse be cured by the method of treating poisoning? The slave did not think of this for a moment, and was stunned for a moment, wondering, if it is not a curse, then how did the master get poisoned? Cerberus said, "There are many possibilities. Maybe there is nothing wrong with that Zanme's wine. Maybe it is really a poison that only takes a few days to take effect. However, no other more suspicious people have been found for the time being, so we still have to check the background of this mole." After a pause, he said to the slave, "If you are afraid, I can find someone else to do this." This slave is called Dilus. He is a very shrewd and ambitious person. Cerberus sent him to take care of Marcutulis. He originally hoped that he could gain Marcutulis' trust and put someone by Marcutulis' side in the future. He was eager to show that he took this matter very seriously in front of Cerberus, but Marcutulis almost died right under his nose. He wanted to make up for this mistake and worked very hard when Cerberus asked him to find suspicious people. He didn't want to fail at this time, so he gritted his teeth and said, "It's okay, I can do it." Cerberus asked him to continue investigating, but he knew that, even if he found that the mole had a drug that delayed the onset of the disease for a few days, it would be difficult to prove that Zami, Pyrrhus and the mole were related to Marcutulis poisoning. If they were not caught on the spot, this loss would probably be in vain. However, if we can find out where the problem is, we can prevent it in the future. Marcutulis was very weak for several days after he recovered, but because of the poisoning incident, he didn't trust the public doctor's clinic, and he asked to go home as soon as the poison was relieved. It doesn't matter where the bone injury is healed. Cerberus now also attaches great importance to his safety, and took him home as he wished. The poisoning severely damaged his vitality, and coupled with his leg injury, he was bedridden for a long time. But even so, when he felt better, he asked Gangula and Cerberus to tell him about the current business situation of the family business, and also asked that in the future, no matter whether it was for the family or the business, any money coming in or going out had to go through his hands. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 85 Home. Gangula was a traditional ancient Greek woman. Even though she dared to fight her husband in a desperate situation, she handed over the key to the cash box without saying a word when her husband asked for it. Marcutulis lay on the bed and asked her to move the cash box to the bedside and open it. He looked inside and asked suspiciously, "Is this all the money in the house?" Gangula nodded. Marcutulis said in disbelief. It's not even the month of Ancestorian yet, and the spring fir hasn't been harvested yet, and this is all the money left at home. I calculated that, even if the carpet business is average, we should have at least 1,000 drachmas a year. Where did the money go? Ganjira said calmly. Cerberus used it to buy property, slaves, and start a new business. Marcutulis asked hurriedly, how many slaves did you buy after I went to serve? Ganjira counted and said, we bought 30 more weavers, 6 dyers, and 11 male slaves, to look after the house. Marcutulis covered his chest, his heart almost stopped beating, and shouted, what did you buy so many slaves for? Are there so many jobs for weavers to do? And dyers, why did you buy so many dyers? And you bought 11 guards. Are you crazy? You have money, but nowhere to spend it? What valuables in our house require so many people to look after it? Ganjila explained, there was a period of time last year when people always wanted to break into our house, to steal the craft of carpet weaving. For safety reasons, we bought a few people. After that, we had Prato, and the amount of money going in was huge, so we added a few more people. The dyers were hired specially by Cerberus, because the amount of colored thread used in weaving carpets was too large and there was not enough manpower. He also bought a piece of land to build a dyeing workshop. In addition to dyeing colored yarn for his own use, he also takes outside business, and the business is pretty good. Marcutulis asked hurriedly, the amount of money going in Prato is huge. But I heard that Prato is not profitable. What's going on? Ganjila shook his head and said, Cerberus is in charge of Prato. I'm not too sure. You should ask him. Sure enough, Marcutulis asked about Prato after Cerberus came back. Cerberus did not hide it, and told him the current business status of Prato. The cost has not been recovered yet, but the profit is growing. Because as he almost monopolized the currency exchange business, not only foreign merchants came to exchange our coins, but also Athenian merchants exchanged foreign coins, or exchanged foreign coins for another kind of foreign coin. The income from this part of the business did not need to be shared with the mint, it was pure profit. In addition, Plato launched a new business, to help people with owl coins to exchange them, charging half of the service fee. The profit of this business was more considerable than the cooperation with the mint, so Plato's current profit was more than enough to cover expenses. Of course, since Plato absorbed deposits, these deposits had not yet been invested in value added, and interest had to be paid, which increased expenses, and the profit was still very meager. But when the value added investment began, the profit would expand rapidly like a snowball. After listening to his introduction to this new business, Marcutulis was stunned. He knew that Cerberus was very smart, but the wisdom shown by Cerberus this time was beyond his understanding, which made him feel a little awed. He was less than 10 years old. He couldn't help but think of Cerberus's title, Son of God. He had never doubted that Cerberus was the favorite of the gods, but he used to think that no matter how much Cerberus was favored by the gods, he was still his son, and he could exercise all the rights of a father. But Cerberus at this moment made him feel so strange, with an indescribable temperament, perhaps closer to the gods, which made him clearly understand that he could not control it. After a long while, he asked tentatively in a negotiating tone, then, can I see the accounts of Plato? Cerberus raised his eyebrows and said, of course, there are some at home. Plato had to reconcile the accounts every day, and Cerberus sometimes brought them home to do it. He went to his room and moved some clay tablets. Ancient Greece did not produce paper, and people's main writing tools were clay tablets. When rich people recorded important things, they sometimes used expensive papyrus imported from distant Egypt, or parchment, which was cheaper than papyrus, but Cerberus was not so extravagant for ordinary accounts. He handed the clay tablet to Marcutulis, and then took a new clay tablet, and carved Arabic numerals on it, and carved the corresponding Attic numerals next to it. He briefly explained the use of Arabic numerals, let Marcutulis read it slowly, and turned away. Marcutulis had an ordinary family when he was young, and he had never been to school properly. He did not recognize many words on the clay tablet, and his math level was only at the level of being able to calculate how many loaves of bread cost how much money. The accounts on the clay tablet were very complicated. He looked at it for a long time without understanding it. He sighed and gave up. The weather gradually warmed up, and more merchant ships were moored at the port of Piraeus. The business in Prato was getting better and better, and the same was true for the carpet business. From the end of the last sailing season to now, nearly 5 months have passed, and the female slaves who weave carpets have woven more than 40 blankets, most of which were orders from last year. With the arrival of the sailing season, the merchants who placed orders came to collect the goods, and Synopsis will have a large income again. Of course, as the weather gets hotter, the time to collect spring wool is approaching, and there will be a large expenditure. Synopsis' original plan was to let Meghana take full charge of the spring wool collection this year. He also wanted Meghana to go to the countryside in advance, set up outlets in suitable places, and ask a local to help with the purchase to improve efficiency. But Marcutelis might add some variables to this plan. By the time the spring wool is collected, Marcutelis's legs should have almost recovered. If he doesn't need to return to the guard post, based on Synopsis' understanding of him, he will definitely find a way to seize power, and Meghana will not be able to do it easily. In addition, some relatively crude imitation carpets have begun to appear in Athens this year. Synopsis wants to monopolize the purchase of coarse wool as much as possible and crack down on these imitations from the source. This requires a lot of money. Marcutelis is not a generous person, and he will also have to go through some trouble. What Synopsis didn't expect was that before Marcutelis caused trouble for him, the trouble outside came to him first. At that time, he was arranging to go to the countryside to collect cashmere. The time for collecting cashmere is much earlier than the time for collecting wool. When the weather gets warmer, the goats will shed their wool, and it is time to go to collect it. He arranged for Meghana to go, and Marcutelis was very worried, but his legs had not grown back yet and he could not go, so he wanted Synopsis to go as well. Synopsis assured him, and told him, that Meghana was in charge of collecting wool last autumn, and there was nothing wrong. As he was talking, a middle-aged man walked into their courtyard and said, "Congratulations, Marcutelis. Your application for exemption from military service has been approved by the military consul, but you have to make some contributions to the city-state." Chapter 86 Chorus Leader. Marcutelis asked, "Who are you?" The man replied, "I'm Damasius, assistant to Archon Mingzu." 1. Marcutelis asked in confusion, "What contribution do I need to make?" Damasius said, "Do you know about the tragedy competition at the Dionysian festival next month?" Marcutelis had a bad feeling and said, "Of course I know." Damasius said, "There is a tragedy chorus that is missing a captain. Someone has nominated you to take on this honorary position. The so-called captain of the tragedy chorus is the sponsor of the tragedy performance, responsible for all the expenses of the actors from rehearsal to performance. This is not a small amount of money. You have to know that a tragedy has 15 people in the chorus, plus an actor. The costumes and props alone are a high expense. Add the remuneration of the accompaniment musicians and other expenses. It is roughly estimated that it will cost at least 300 drachmas. Their family of 3 plus more than 50 slaves may not be able to spend so much in half a year. This amount of money can bankrupt a middle-class family." Marcutelis was so heartbroken that he asked, "Why me? Who recommended me? There are many citizens in the city who are richer and more famous than me, and I'm not qualified." Damasius laughed and said, "Marcutelis, you are too modest. Everyone knows that the god of wealth has visited Marcutelis's house in the past 2 years. I heard that your family earned a talent by weaving a carpet for the Queen of Persia last year. If you had not gone to serve, you should have been invited to be the sponsor of last year's tragedy competition. As for fame, will you still be famous after this competition? By then, you will be qualified to hold all the official positions in Athens, including the Archon and Treasurer, too. Isn't this a good thing?" Marcutelis knew that this was just a nice talk. Official positions must be elected. Although he was qualified, who would elect him? He was really reluctant to spend the money, and explained, "Those are just rumors. My family is not that rich. Although we have made some money in the past 2 years, we have spent it all. You see, wool, fuel, and weaving workers all cost money. In fact, we have nothing left. We don't have the financial resources to be the captain of the tragedy chorus." Damasius frowned, showing a look of contempt, and said, "If you are not willing to contribute to the city-state, then exchange your property with others. You choose someone who you think is richer than you, and should bear this responsibility, and ask him to exchange property with him. If he disagrees, then he will have to serve as the captain of the tragedy chorus in your place. If he agrees, then you will exchange the property of both parties, and after you get his property, you will serve as the captain of the tragedy chorus. According to the laws of the city-state, this is the only way to exempt you from this position. Marcutulus. Marcutulus slapped the edge of the bed and said indignantly, "This is so unfair. There are many people in the city-state who are richer than our family. This is bullying. There are so many oil presses, knife workshops, and pottery workshops in the city. Which of those owners doesn't make a fortune every day and earn much more than us? For example, that Pisadorius, his family has a bed press, a blacksmith shop, and an oil press. I heard that he can earn several talents a year. Why don't you go to them?" Cerberus remained silent. Marcutulus stole a glance at his face, paused and asked tentatively, "Cerebius, why don't we propose to exchange property with this Pisadorius? He will definitely not be willing to do so, and even if he is willing, we will not suffer any loss. There are 20 bed makers in his bed making workshop alone, and one bed maker is worth at least 4 minas. The knife workshop and the oil press are bigger than the bed making workshop, so we will definitely not suffer any loss." Cerberus smiled and said, "Father, don't you want to know who recommended you to be the captain of this tragedy chorus?" Marcutulus asked hurriedly, "Who is it?" "It's this Pisadorius. He was the captain of the adult singing competition at the Taglia festival last year. If you propose to exchange property with him, he can probably be exempted by stating that he has just performed public service. There are only so many rich people in the city-state, so many festivals every year, and various competitions. Except for us new citizens, no one has not performed public service. Our family is the richest among the new citizens, and you are the only retired one. We can't refuse." Marcutulus showed real regret on his face. People who are currently serving in the military are exempted from all public services. He deeply regretted why he tried to be clever and evade military service. He almost lost his life first, and now he is being slaughtered as a fat sheep. Cerberus comforted him. "Don't think too much, father, it's a matter of time." Berus took the glass of wine handed over by Synopsis and said, "Synopsis, you are really bad. You made Marcutulus lose a lot of money just by talking." Synopsis smiled and said, "I failed to kill him last time. This time I will let him go and collect some interest." Berus said a little guilty, "Do you think that little bastard Cerberus really has the power of healing? He can even cure such a secret poison." Speaking of this, Synopsis was also a little scared. If Cerberus was really so favored by the gods, would their behavior anger the gods and bring bad luck to themselves? But he couldn't swallow this breath, and at the same time he didn't want to expose his fear in front of outsiders, so he forced himself to say, "Shit, he doesn't have any healing power, he's just a little liar. You should remember the illness I had last year. I also let him touch me, but it was of no use. In the end, it was the public doctor who cured me. It was the mole's poison that didn't work, and the public doctor cured it." Berus muttered, "The poison is magical enough. It can only take effect 2 or 3 days after poisoning. Besides, haven't we tried it with goats?" He doubted whether Synopsis' prayer at that time was not pious. Synopsis himself had his doubts, but he refused to admit it. He said very reasonably, "This only proves that the public doctor's medical skills are really good, and we are unlucky. It's not too surprising. This public doctor is a famous doctor. I heard that his fame has spread beyond the Aegean Sea and to the Egyptians. We underestimated him. We have to use other methods to deal with Marcutulus in the future." Berus said, "What method?" Synopsis tapped his temple proudly and said, "Just like this time, we can deal with him openly. Can he be as familiar with the citizens as we are? We can do some tricks and assign him to the chorus that we are familiar with. Just by tampering with the props and costumes and improving the grade, we can easily double his expenses. Even if he has more money, how many times can he afford such things?" Berus gave him a thumbs up in admiration. Synopsis said confidently, "Besides, Prato has absorbed so much money, and this money must be put out to make money. At that time, we can do more tricks." Chapter 87, Competition for Qualification. Aeschylus asked his 2 companions, "Are you ready?" The two replied, ready. Aeschylus checked the papyrus in his hand one last time, and led the two into the Dionysus theater. The huge half-bowl-shaped theater was empty, with only some people on the stage at the bottom of the bowl. The three walked over, and a middle-aged man with a hooked nose, who also held a stack of papyrus in his hand, greeted them with a smile. Aeschylus, you are here. Why are you bringing a companion? Another man who also held papyrus came over and said, are you scared by the failure last time, Aeschylus, and you need someone to accompany you? Aeschylus said politely, no, they are here to witness how I won the place in the tragedy competition. The hooked-nosed man smiled and said, what a confident young man. Can I see your script? You can also see mine. Aeschylus agreed, and the two exchanged the papyrus in their hands, and looked at it attentively. Aeschylus finished reading first, and then asked the hook-nosed man, can my friend read it too? The hook-nosed man shrugged his shoulders, to show that he didn't care, so Aeschylus handed the papyrus to his companion. After a while, the hook-nosed man also finished reading, with a complicated look on his face, and didn't speak. The second man who spoke to them said, let me read it too. He took the papyrus from him, flipped through a few pages, and then said to Aeschylus contemptuously, arrogant young man, when something fails, you should ask someone who is better at it than you to make up for your shortcomings, instead of insisting on going down the wrong path to the end. He returned the papyrus to Aeschylus and turned away. Aeschylus said calmly, only the muse living on Mount Olympus has the right to judge my failure, no one else can. People came to the bottom of the bowl one after another, including members of the tragedy competition committee, playwrights who came to compete for the competition quota, and sponsors who were going to sponsor this competition. What surprised Aeschylus the most was that he saw the son of the gods here. Aeschylus greeted him curiously, Cerebius, why are you here? Cerebius said, my father Marcutulus will be the leader of a chorus, but he has a leg injury and can't walk easily, so I'm here to choose the chorus for him. Aeschylus said happily, so that's how it is. I remember you said that, if there were more actors talking to each other in the tragedy performance, recreating the situation, when the story happened, you would like to watch it. If I win the competition, how about you choose our chorus? Cerebius smiled and said, sure. Aeschylus was overjoyed and said, then we have a deal. The committee members came and sat down in the audience. The participants of this city's Dionysian tragedy competition went on stage one by one to read their works, and the committee members voted to decide who would get the competition quota. There were 7 or 8 people competing for the quota this time, and Aeschylus was the fourth to go on stage. He sat with his companions and Cerebius, listening to the first person to go on stage recite his work. All contestants' works were tetralogy, that is, 3 tragedies and 1 satyr play. It took at least 2 hours for one person to finish reading the work. Aeschylus came on stage early. After introducing his companions to Cerebius, he chatted with him in a relaxed and low voice. Why are you at the theater so early, Cerebius? The chorus captains only come after the contestants are decided. I've never seen how the contestants are selected. I was curious, so I wanted to come and see early. What's so good about this? Oh, you like listening to stories? I liked it very much when I was your age, but I think the tragedy competition with only the story of Dionysus is too monotonous. Other gods and heroes can also be praised, such as Prometheus, Achilles, Agamemnon. Many gods and heroes are worthy of praise. This time I wrote about Achilles, the son of the sea goddess Thetis. Do you want to see my script first? Aeschylus was as talkative as ever. Cerebius wanted to appreciate the original works of playwrights from more than 2000 years ago, but now he couldn't appreciate it. He had to take the papyrus he handed to him and read it. Let Cerebus evaluate it. Aeschylus's writing style is typical of ancient Greece, with many similes, metaphors, and parallelism. The text is simple, magnificent and romantic, and the expression and appeal are very strong. He was attracted by it after reading a few lines. The first person to come on stage finished reading the third tragedy and couldn't help but savor it again and again. Aeschylus asked expectantly, Cereb, what do you think? Cerebus praised generously, I think it's great. If the committee can give you a place, it will definitely cause a sensation at the Dionysian festival this time. You will definitely be famous. Aeschylus said confidently. I think so too. His companion patted him on the shoulder, took the papyrus from Cerberus, and read it softly with another companion a little nervously. Aeschylus finally let Cerberus listen to other contestants reading, but while they were reading, he was commenting, complaining, in Cerberus' ear. If he didn't have something in his mind, every comment was on point, and some were even more exciting than the original text of the reciter. This behavior would be simply annoying. Cerberus didn't always think about how to make money and study. In fact, he knew how to enjoy life in his later life. He likes music, skiing, rock climbing, and is also an expert in horse riding, windsurfing, and surfing. It's just that he didn't dare to relax here because of the pressure of survival, and there were really no entertainment activities. His life has always been very monotonous and boring. Aeschylus's real-time complaints made him feel nostalgic for watching barrage videos. With such an interesting person accompanying him, Cerberus, who originally planned to watch for a while and then leave, watched Aeschylus on stage and even had a meal in the theater in the middle. After Aeschylus came on stage, he claimed that he had written 4 plays in a new form. He was worried that reading the script alone would not be able to intuitively show his innovation, so he asked to perform a trial segment with his friends for the committee members to see. The committee members were tired after sitting for a day, and they were also a little aesthetically fatigued after listening to the gorgeous words for a day. Hearing what he said, they were aroused and agreed after a few discussions. Aeschylus called his 2 companions to the stage, and the 3 of them performed emotionally. One of the 3 Aeschylus performed the role of the chorus, one played Achilles, and one played this supporting role and that supporting role from time to time. They had a lot of dialogues with each other, which was completely different from the tragic performance form that was almost entirely singing at this time. But this performance was unexpectedly fascinating, giving people a sense of being in the scene and watching the tragic fate of the characters in the play. People who saw this performance form for the first time were extremely shocked. After the 3 finished their performances, the committee members did not know what to say. After whispering to each other for a while, they said to Aeschylus, Aeschylus, this performance form is indeed very novel. You should go back first. We can give you an answer after listening to everyone's works. Aeschylus said, citizens, before I leave the stage, I have one thing to say. It has only been more than 30 years since Thespis changed the Dionysian hymn into a tragedy. Is this form so perfect that it cannot be changed? Chapter 88. Preparations for the tragedy. Cerberus left the theater with Aeschylus and his companions. One of Aeschylus' companions worriedly speculated, do you think the committee will give us the quota? Aeschylus said optimistically, I think so. 30 years ago, the tyrant dared to let feasts change the Dionysian hymn into a tragedy. Are we not as enlightened as the tyrant? Don't you think so, Cerberus? Cerberus smiled and said, after you added more people, the tragedy is better than the original one. Everyone can see it. I believe that people will accept your innovation sooner or later. Aeschylus became more confident after hearing this, and said happily to his companions, look, the Son of God also thinks so. After listening to the works of all the contestants, the competition committee really gave one of the quotas to Aeschylus after discussion. Cerberus was called to select the chorus, and Aeschylus smiled at him excitedly. The captain of the chorus is usually directly appointed by the committee, but if both parties are interested, the committee will not insist on splitting them up. Therefore, although the other 2 sponsors also expressed interest in Aeschylus, Aeschylus was still assigned to Cerberus. After the distribution, Aeschylus discussed the training and performance with Cerberus. Aeschylus stated in advance, Cerberus, some of the props and costumes for my 4-part play may be expensive. Cerberus said, I have prepared. What props and costumes do you need? The first of the 3 tragedies written by Aeschylus is called Thetis. The content is that the goddess Thetis heard a prophecy about her son. He will be famous in history, but he is destined not to live to old age, and will die on the battlefield at a young age. Because of this prophecy, Thetis held Achilles' feet upside down, and soaked him in the Styx, hoping to make him immortal, and secretly entrusted him to Lycomedes, the king of Cyrrhus Island, hiding him in the palace, and raising him as a girl to avoid war. But the arrangement of the goddess of fate cannot be disobeyed even by gods, and Achilles still went to the battlefield. The second part is called Achilles, which tells the story of Achilles, who knew that his own doom would come after the death of his enemy Hector. In order to avenge his close friend Patroclus, he killed Hector and tied his body to the chariot and was shot in the heel by a hidden arrow and died. The third part is called Odysseus, which tells the story of the king of Ithaca, Odysseus, who came to the underworld to ask about his future fate after the end of the Trojan War and met the soul of Achilles by chance. He complimented Achilles' soul that he was respected like a god in his life and he must be a great ghost and live a happy life after his death. Achilles replied to him, "I would rather be a slave in the world than a king in the underworld." Therefore, Aeschylus needed the jewelry and clothes of the goddess Thetis and Hera, Athena and Thetis' sisters who appeared in the story because women could not show their faces. All female roles were played by men, so the actors also needed special dummy rooms. In addition, there are helmets, armor, clothes, weapons, and chariots of Achilles, his comrades, and his enemies, as well as the ferry that Odysseus took to the underworld in the costumes of the dead in the underworld. Many of these props and costumes can be borrowed from others, such as the jewelry of the goddesses, and the helmets, armor, and weapons to be used in the second part, but many still need to be specially customized, such as the clothes of the goddesses, the costumes of the dead, and the chariots and boats. Cerberus roughly estimated that 300 drachmas might not be enough. Fortunately, he had anticipated this and reserved sufficient funds. The family of Aeschylus was an old noble family. Aeschylus told Cerberus that he could borrow some weapons and armor and asked him to borrow more. The first, second, and third class citizens of Athens all had their own weapons, so it was not difficult to borrow them. However, considering that they were to be used on the stage and the users were heroes, it would be better to borrow better ones, so Cerberus went to the wealthy Alcmaeon's house to borrow them. Danaus's father, Lucius, liked Cerberus very much and took him to his family's armory to let him choose. The Alcmaeon family was different from ordinary families. It was a powerful family with military and financial strength to compete with the tyrant who owned the entire Athens at that time. The armory was not only filled with armor and weapons for the citizens of the family, but also enough to equip a small private army. This storehouse was similar to the public armories of some small city-states. Lucius opened the door and showed Cerberus a proud look. It was the first time Cerberus saw an armory in the cold weapon era, just as described in a poem. The armor in the big room was brilliant, the ceiling was decorated with shining military helmets, and the white main helmet ornaments fluttered down. The walls were hung with dazzling bronze greaves that could block the flying arrows of strong crossbows. There were new breastplates, hollow shields, bronze swords, and countless animal skin skirts everywhere. Cerberus opened his eyes wide and walked in to take a closer look. No man would dislike weapons, and he was no exception. He looked up at the helmets and found that they were not all the same style. They were probably made by different craftsmen. It was very likely that some of them were captured in battle and had signs of damage. The same was true for the armor hanging on the wall. There were many shields placed against the wall, including round shields, crescent-shaped shields, and E-shaped shields. Most of them were made of metal, with fine and rough castings. There were also some large H-shaped leather shields that could protect the whole body. In addition, there were more long and short swords, spears, tridents. All these armors and weapons were polished and oiled and kept very carefully. Cerberus held a long sword with both hands and pulled it out for a closer look. He saw that the thick sword with a width of 4 fingers was cold and the smooth sword blade clearly reflected his face. He put the sword halfway back into the sheath, stretched out a finger to test the blade, and asked Lucius, "Can I ask which sword is the sharpest here?" Lucius laughed and said, "Why not?" He used a key to open a cabinet in the corner, took out an inconspicuous short sword, motioned to Cerberus to pull out the sword in his hand and hold it tightly, and chopped the sword with the short sword. The long sword was actually cut off, and half of the sword fell to the ground with a clang. The long sword was very heavy, and Cerberus couldn't even lift it with one hand. Lucius chopped it so hard that the sword suddenly became lighter. Under the reaction force, he staggered and almost fell. Lucius quickly grabbed him. After Cerberus stood firm, he looked at the broken sword in his hand. He was not surprised by the sharpness of the dagger in Lucius's hand, but cast a look of admiration at Lucius. "Lucius, it turns out that you are a master of swordsmanship." He was not strong enough, and Lucius's chop of the sword in his hand should have caused the sword to fall out of his hand, but Lucius was able to concentrate the force almost completely on the point of force, so that he was minimally affected. If it weren't for the sudden change in the weight of the sword, he wouldn't even stagger. Seeing that he was in a good mood, Lucius smiled reservedly and said, "Hurry up and choose something suitable." Cerberus said, "I borrow weapons for stage performances, so they don't need to be too sharp, just beautiful enough." He picked out a few gorgeous and beautiful helmets, armor, and weapons, and Lucius generously asked the slaves to help him take them away. After choosing the weapons, he also borrowed some women's jewelry from Lucius, and Lucius took him to his wife. Danae's mother Kate also liked him very much, and opened her jewelry box for him to choose. Although the family's financial situation has gradually improved in the past 2 years, Ganjera is used to being simple and has no habit of buying luxury goods for herself. Cerberus has focused on expanding his business and studying, and has not thought about this aspect, nor has he bought anything for Ganjera. At this time, seeing Kate's jewelry box open, it is full of jewels and treasures, and he can't help but feel a little guilty about Ganjera. Ganjera has been doing her best for him, but he rarely cares about Ganjera, and has never thought about this aspect. He secretly made up his mind to make up for her in the future. Kate's jewelry box is full of earrings, necklaces, rings, armlets, pins. Most of them are made of gold and inlaid with various high quality gems. Cerberus picked and chose a multi-layered necklace with geometric patterns made of gems and glass of different colors, with very harmonious and bright colors, several very finely crafted gold snake-shaped armbands and some gold animal-shaped brooches inlaid with gems. Chapter 89 Flower Festival. After choosing the ornaments, Cerberus did not take them away immediately, but agreed with Kate that they would only be borrowed for one day on the day of the performance. These precious ornaments are not easy to preserve, and not taking them away will not prevent Kate from wearing them on a daily basis. Kate also generously offered to lend them a few embroidered belts. In mythology, Hera is depicted wearing golden shoes and a crown. Kate did not have a crown, and Cerberus and Aeschylus could not borrow large-sized women's golden shoes that could fit men's feet. Both of them needed to be specially ordered. They found a goldsmith to make a copper crown and plate it with gold, and asked a shoemaker to make a pair of large-sized women's shoes, which were wrapped with gold foil on the outside, and they were also very beautiful. The image of the goddess Athena was wearing a helmet and armor, holding a spear in one hand and a sheepskin shield in the other, with the pattern of the snake-haired monster Medusa inlaid on the shield. The armor and spears were the same for men and women, so they did not need to be specially ordered. The leather shield inlaid with the pattern of Medusa was also easy to make, but the larger props of the angled boat and the carriage were not easy to make. Aeschylus wanted to bring a real chariot to the stage, but the stage was too small, and the chariot and the horses pulling it could not move, so they could not perform. The horn boat could be put on the stage, but it could not float without water, and could not be moved. Finally, at the suggestion of Cerberus, they asked carpenters to make exquisite models of chariots and horn boats with the lightest wood, and spent a lot of money to paint them with beautiful colors. The horses were replaced by actors, and the bottom of the horn boat was equipped with pulleys. They tried it on the stage and the effect was also very good. As for the actors' costumes, the weather had already started to get hot during the Great Dionysian Festival, and the costumes were made of linen fabric, which was not expensive. Cerberus bought the best fabrics, and asked the dyeing workshop at home to dye the fabrics specially. With the embroidered belt lent by Kath, it was perfect. Aeschylus was very satisfied and claimed that all this was unprecedented luxury on the tragic stage, and it would surely shock everyone who came to watch the tragedy that day, whether they were locals or foreigners from afar. The main duty of the captain of the tragedy chorus is to provide props and costumes. After these are complete, there is basically nothing to do. The rehearsal of the chorus is carried out in the theater in turn, and there is no need to find another venue. The members are all citizens, and the performance is voluntary, and does not need to be paid. Only the musicians who accompany the performance need to be paid. Apart from that, in theory, the captains do not need to do anything. However, the captains of the chorus usually care about the chorus they sponsor, because if a chorus can win the championship, it will bring great glory to his sponsor. The city Dionysia is the most grand festival in Athens, except for the Panathenaic festival held every 4 years. It not only has religious significance, but also is an important occasion for the city-state, to show its military power and unite people. On the day when the tragedy competition begins, the theater will hold a ceremony of offering wine to 10 generals, announce the list of honorary citizens, display tributes from vassal states, and orphans of martyrs. In addition to citizens of the state and expatriates, citizens of vassal territories and many foreigners will come from afar to participate, and the reputation of the winning chorus and captain will spread far overseas. In Cerberus's opinion, this was the perfect opportunity for advertising, and the price was just to sponsor a tragedy performance, which was extremely cheap. He encouraged Aeschylus to use his imagination, and not worry about money. He could decorate the stage in any way that was dazzling, and the actors' costumes were as luxurious and shocking as possible. If they could not borrow anything, they would order it specially. He made sure that, even if they did not win the crown in the end, the audience would be impressed by their play. Aeschylus was very happy to receive this promise. He was afraid that Cerberus would not be able to make the decision, because Marcutulus did not show up, so he was very restrained in spending money. After confirming that Marcutulus would not object, he bought many props, including the exquisite thrones of Zeus and Hera, the king of the gods, the realistic Troy city made of straw, the black poplar trees of the underworld. He even asked Cerberus to dye a long and wide blue cloth to act as a river. In addition, whenever the chorus practiced, Cerberus sent slaves to deliver wine and food. With such support, Aeschylus and the chorus members rehearsed very hard. Cerberus went to see it several times. Whether it was Aeschylus, the leading actor, another actor who played many supporting roles, or the ordinary members of the chorus, the singing and dialogue were full of emotion and sincere, which was very touching. While the actors were rehearsing attentively, the month of Anastasia arrived. Anastasia means the month of flower festival. As the name suggests, it is a month when flowers bloom. The 12th day of this month is the Anastasia festival. When there is no war, the Anastasia festival is celebrated for 5 to 6 days. During this period, Athens did not have a war with other city-states, so the city-state decided to celebrate for 6 days. The first day was the opening of the urn festival. This day was a rare day for slaves and masters to celebrate together, and Cerberus gave all the slaves in his house a holiday. Early in the morning, except for Marcutulus, whose legs could not walk for a long time, and Gargara, who was prudent in character, everyone ran to the wild, including Megana and Cerberus. The only difference is that Megana was with the female slaves, while Cerberus was with the male slaves. They were going to pick flowers outside the city and decorate their houses and wine jars. This day was similar to the Qingming festival in ancient China. Almost all the people in Athens went out of the city, regardless of gender, age or status. People wore light spring clothes and carried baskets full of wine and food to play in the suburbs, picking flowers to decorate their houses and wine jars, preparing for the evening celebration of the opening of the new wine jars. When they arrived at the city gate, Cerberus separated from the slaves. The slaves were uncomfortable with him. By chance, he met Aristides here and left the city with Aristides. Cerberus didn't know where there were more flowers outside the city, so he asked Aristides, "Where should we go?" Aristides looked at his black hair and smiled and said, "Let's go along the Ilissus River to see if we can pick some daffodils." Cerberus didn't know where there were more flowers outside the city, so he had no opinion. The two of them walked around the Ilissus River and along the riverbank. There were many people who made the same choice as them. There were many young girls walking in groups in the spring breeze, laughing and joking. They picked flowers and made wreaths to wear on their heads and bodies. Their smiles were more beautiful than the flowers in spring. Cerberus and Aristides were both fascinated by this rare and beautiful scenery. The women of Athens only went out during these few days. Their gracefulness overshadowed the spring scenery. Some young men followed them from a distance, eager to talk to them. Occasionally, someone dared to approach them, and the girls burst into laughter, or pushed out a blushing female companion, letting the two walk away alone hand in hand, and even the air was filled with sweetness. Seeing this scene, Cerberus remembered to ask Aristides, "Aristides, you are not married yet, do you have a beloved girl? Have I delayed you from meeting her?" Aristides smiled and shook his head and said, "You think too much. I don't have a beloved girl." Cerberus rarely talked to Aristides about his personal topics. At this time, he became curious and asked, "What kind of girl do you like?" Aristides looked at him and said frankly, "I don't know. I have never been in contact with girls." With the conservative atmosphere in Athens, Cerberus was not surprised. As far as he knew, there were many blind marriages here. He asked again, "So what kind of wife do you want to marry?" Aristides looked at him strangely and asked with a smile, "Cerberus, are you interested in the opposite sex now? I know you have always been too mature, but you are not even 10 years old now. You should at least wait until you are 30 to consider the issue of marriage, right?" Cerberus was certainly not embarrassed by such a joke, but was attracted by the information revealed in his words. In his impression, early marriage was common in both the East and the West in early cultures, but Aristides' words revealed that 30 was the right age for marriage. He was sure that this was specifically for men. He clearly remembered that Megana had privately talked about the girl next door, saying that she was already 19 years old and would not be able to get married if she couldn't find a husband. But even so, it was strange enough. He asked, "Why wait until you are 30? Aristides explained, "Cerberus, you are so smart, you will definitely be able to study at the National Gymnasium in the future. After completing your studies, you will serve 3 years in the military, and you will be at least in your 20s. Then you will participate in public life as a formal citizen for a few years, and you will be in your prime when you are around 30. That is the right time to get married. People who get married before this are immature and will not be able to teach their wives and children well. Getting married will do them more harm than good." Cerberus understood that Aristides meant that people over the age of 30 have a relatively stable economic foundation and personality, so they can shoulder the burden of the family. China also has the saying that one should be established at the age of 30. This is quite scientific. Cerberus was a celibate and had no plans to get married in later generations, let alone here. This topic was asked once, but no further investigation was made. For example, why did ancient China not make such a rational decision on the appropriate age for marriage despite having the same understanding? The winding Ilissus River flowed happily, and the clear water reflected the blue sky and white clouds. There were dots of flowers blooming on the riverbank, including daffodils, dandelions, hyacinths, violets. The good ones had been picked by people passing by, leaving only some inconspicuous ones. However, Aristides and Cerberus didn't care about this. Aristides picked flowers for the festival, and Cerberus went out of the city to get some fresh air because the weather was fine. The two picked some flowers casually, chatting while walking, and when they were tired, they chose a piece of soft grass to sit down and enjoy the gentle spring breeze and bright sunshine. Chapter 90, Conversation on Marriage. Aristides made a wreath of flowers and was about to put it on Cerberus's head when the sunlight in front of him was suddenly blocked, and a wreath of pure white and fragrant daffodils was handed to them. Aristides looked up and found that it was Aeschylus wearing a wreath of hyacinths. Aeschylus looked down at him and said contemptuously, "Aristides, your ugly wreath is not worthy of the beauty of our captain. Only a wreath of daffodils is worthy of being worn on his head." Then he put the wreath on Cerberus. Aristides didn't mind and smiled and put on the wreath himself. Cerberus laughed and said, "Thank you." Aeschylus sat down next to them and asked, "I saw you from a distance. What were you talking about just now?" Cerberus said, "We were talking about marriage. Why is the appropriate age for men to get married 30? Aeschylus shook his head and said, "Let me tell you, wise men should not get married. Marriage is just a burden and a shackle for men. Marrying a wife is like putting lead on the feet of an eagle so that it can no longer fly on its wings. Most women's minds are ignorant, with limited wisdom and virtue, but they all have a jealous heart. The only thing they can do well is to manage housework. Slaves can also manage housework. Why do we have to marry a troublesome person home?" Aristides said disapprovingly, "Aeschylus, you are not the kind of person who hates women, are you? If you don't get married, who will give birth to a son for you? Without a son, who will support you when you are old and weak? If all citizens have no heirs, how can our city-state continue?" Aeschylus shrugged his shoulders and said, so, this is the annoying thing about being a citizen. There are always some obligations that you have to fulfill. I'm sure that, if it were not for the fact that the salary collector would come to your house if you don't get married at an old age, there would be twice as many bachelors in this city as fools willing to get married. Aristides was not angry when he was called a fool. He said, you are prejudiced against women. There are also smart women whose wisdom and virtue are not inferior to men. For example, the poet Sappho, who is called the 10th goddess of literature and art, is she not more talented than most men? Antigone, the daughter of Oedipus, did not hesitate to violate the king's ban to bury her brother who rebelled against the city-state and was executed for it. Isn't she more courageous than all the men of Thebes? You say that most women are ignorant, but they just lack the opportunity to receive education like us. Aren't there many higher-ranking women who have the opportunity to receive some good education, who are more witty and wiser than men? We marry women and educate them with our own virtues and inspire the good parts of their nature. Just as a respected teachers carefully instill virtues into our bodies, we also educate them in the same way and then raise excellent offspring with them. Isn't it a pleasant thing? Aeschylus made an incredible expression and said, Aristides, you are too optimistic. How many Sapphos and Antigone are there in this world? I would rather go to a brothel when my blood is boiling with desire. I only need Anoples to choose one of the foals of Aphrodite, who are neatly lined up in a row and dressed in carefully woven transparent clothes. I don't want to do such a stupid thing as marrying a wife and not knowing whether I can educate her well and let her control me and satisfy her many desires. Maybe they were sitting in a good position. As they were talking, someone came over and said, Aristides, Aeschylus, and this beautiful little Eris, it's such a nice day. Why don't you go pick flowers and decorate your house? What are you talking about? The three looked up and saw that there were still quite a few people, all celebrities in the city, including two high-class prostitutes with crimson hair. Several people walked over to sit next to them and said, let us also listen to the topic you are talking about. Aeschylus repeated their conversation. After listening to Aristides' views, the two high-class prostitutes looked at Aristides with great interest. When he finished speaking, a middle-aged man known for his eloquence laughed and said, Aeschylus, you are still too young. A family still needs a hostess. Women are definitely not as scary as you think. They are just things to manage the housework in your home. How can they control you? Zeus did not give women such rights. She has no effect on your pleasure outside. On the contrary, with her, you can let go of the housework and get a legal heir. As Aristides said, this can prevent you from falling into the dilemma of no one to support you when you are old. But Aristides, your views are also worrying. You should not pay too much attention to your family. Your energy should be used on public affairs. When you are over 30 years old, you are not only responsible for your family, but also for educating the new generation of young people in the city-state. Just as your teacher taught you carefully, you should also teach a teenager who has entered puberty in this way. Instill love and all virtues into his heart, so that he can grow into a citizen as good as you, or even better than you, so that our city-state can continue to prosper. You want to teach your wife the same way your teacher taught you, which is ridiculous. A woman's heart cannot understand this kind of high love at all. Sappho and Antigone are outliers among women. Sappho has a man's soul, and Antigone is a daughter of Oedipus who can solve the riddle of the Sphinx. You use them to prove that women's wisdom and virtue are wrong. Women's souls are mostly weak and stupid. Having too many expectations for your wife, or respecting her too much will only make her unable to recognize herself, and add countless troubles to yourself. As soon as he finished speaking, two high-class prostitutes protested in unison. Aeschylus also retorted, respectable Chrysippus, I think it is better not to marry a wife than to despise my wife like you do. They are not all meek and foolish sheep, at the mercy of others. I think on the contrary, they are probably more unpredictable witches. Agamemnon killed his daughter, and when he returned home, he was killed in the bedroom by his hateful wife like a bull. Medea even killed her own child cruelly, in order to avenge her unfaithful husband. After Aeschylus expressed his opinion, someone else refuted his words. Each of the 5 or 6 new people had his own opinion on this topic, and everyone had a heated debate about it with great interest. Bees and butterflies flew around the scattered flowers on the grass, the bouquets held in people's hands and the wreaths on their heads. Until the sun was setting in the west, most people agreed that high love can only be obtained from high-class prostitutes and young boys, and wives do not have this ability. No one agreed with Aristides' opinion, including the two high-class prostitutes. Even though they tried their best to exert their charm on Aristides during the conversation, trying to get his favor. Cerberus listened to this typical ancient Greek conversation with great interest, although in his opinion, except for Aristides and Aeschylus, everyone else's opinions were weird. They were also very culturally unique. After the conversation, everyone returned to the city together. Perhaps they had a lot of fun. Although Cerberus hardly spoke during the long discussion, before they parted, a man in charge of preparing for the festival still smiled and invited him. Cerberus, there will be a sacred marriage parade tomorrow. Do you want to go into the temple of the god of wine in the swamp? Chapter 91, Holy Marriage and Fado. Since he didn't pick many flowers, Cerberus bought a bunch of flowers from a row of vendors carrying baskets at the city gate, and took them home. All of them made the same choice. Ganjara decorated the flowers on the passeria, a kind of ceramic wine barrel, and in every room. At dusk, the slaves came back one after another. Marcutulus dragged his injured leg to open the passeria in the courtyard, sacrificed the new wine to the god of wine, and then announced that everyone could drink as much as they wanted. The male slaves cheered, picked up the huge wine vessels prepared in advance, filled them with wine, and competed in drinking. Ganjara led the female slaves to carry a jar of wine to the roof to drink. The men competed in the courtyard to see who could drink faster and more, while the women celebrated in the small space on the roof. The happy people sang and danced. By late at night, everyone was drunk, and the new wine opening jar festival ended in the aroma of wine. The next day was the pouring festival. Early in the morning, Meghana placed Cerberus' best clothes, shoes and a newly woven wreath in front of his door. The sun had not yet risen, the morning light was dim and the temperature was a little cold. After Cerberus got up and was blown by the wind, he was immediately refreshed. After washing with the newly drawn clean spring water and eating something, he and Marcutulus smeared asphalt on the door. Ganjara distributed buckthorn leaves to everyone in the family and asked them to chew them in their mouths. This was said to ward off evil spirits. Some families would go to the cemetery on this day to offer new wine to their deceased relatives so that they could also taste the wonderful taste of new wine in the underworld. Marcutulus was a new immigrant and had no relatives buried here, so this item was omitted. After wiping the door, he chewed the leaves and dragged his injured leg to visit friends. Ganjara said hello and also put on the wreath and went out. Today, all temples except the temple of Bacchus were closed. There were already many pedestrians on the street, including many priests who were rarely seen in normal times. Everyone was dressed in their best clothes and looked relaxed and happy. Cerberus first visited Lucius's house. There were already many people at Lucius's house. He was wearing the clothes of the god of wine and holding a wine staff wrapped with ivy. When he saw Cerberus, he smiled and put a small silver coin in his hand. This is a custom of the water jug festival. Important people in the city have to dress up as the god of wine and give money to the people who visit. Cerberus thanked him and blessed him. Then he visited several business partners and finally went to Aristides' house. It was noon when he arrived at Aristides' house. Aristides also wore a wreath and was waiting for him at home. When he saw him, he smiled and said, "I've been waiting for you for a while." He brought him dried fish and bread for him to eat. Then the two of them went to find the festival organizer who invited them to visit the Swamp Wine Temple yesterday. They passed through the crowds of people competing and drinking, passing many drunkards who were shouting and yelling, and arrived at the temple of Dionysus on the Acropolis. The festival supervisor was busy checking the items needed for the ceremony for the last time, fearing that something was forgotten, and was sweating anxiously. After confirming again and again that there was no mistake, he breathed a sigh of relief, walked over, bent down and smiled at Cerberus. "Are you waiting impatiently? Let's go now." The so-called sacred marriage refers to a ceremony held for Dionysus, the god of wine, on the day of the water jug festival. The form is that the archon, Basilius, sacrificed his wife, Basilina, to Dionysus as the queen. Just a formality. The specific process of this ceremony is that people go to the temple of Dionysus in the swamp, pick up Basilina, who is dressed up as the queen of Dionysus, and walk through the entire city to a small house, called the Bull House in the Agora, a public gathering place in the city center, to hold a sacred wedding. On the day of the pouring festival, before the holy marriage ceremony began, except for the 14 noble ladies who had to dress up as the goddess Grala and worship the 14 altars in the temple, the priests of Dionysus and the officials who organized the festival, no one else could enter the temple. The swamp temple was very small, and only a limited number of people could squeeze in after the holy marriage ceremony began. The festival supervisor took them into the temple, and they could see how Basilina and the noble ladies prepared for the ceremony, and they could also see the ceremony of Grala worshipping the altar in the temple before the holy marriage ceremony, which was very rare. The holy marriage ceremony began at dusk, and it was still early when they arrived. Basilina and her female companions were laughing and dressing up in the inner temple. Aristides was taken away by the supervisor to help him check the items that would be used in the festival and the procession. Sarab was still young, so the supervisor allowed him to enter the inner temple to see Basilina and her female companions dressing up. After Sarab entered the inner temple, the noble ladies asked him where he came from in surprise. Sarabas answered, and they surrounded him and asked him questions, even trying to flirt with him, so Sarabas had to flee in panic. He found Aristides and went with him to check the strange instruments and help the priests to prepare for the night celebration. Soon dusk came. At dusk, people who participated in the celebration poured into the temple from the city like a tide and placed the wreaths on their heads in the temple. Those who could not squeeze into the temple placed the wreaths outside the temple wall. When the procession to pick up Basilina arrived, the priests of Dionysus prayed, and 14 noble ladies dressed as nymphs offered sacrifices to the 14 altars in the temple, and poured new wine on them. After that, people took Basilina out of the temple wearing a crown, a gorgeous veil, and a bright bride's dress, and placed her on a gorgeously decorated carriage. The chariot was in the middle of the procession, and at the front was the wooden statue of the god of wine, which had just been welcomed from the temple. The statue also wore a crown and a luxurious garment made of the finest white wool. It was placed on a boat with wheels, and pulled by people dressed as goats with goat horns on their heads and tails on their buttocks. Many people dressed as Dionysus, Pan and nymphs, wearing deerskins, holding wine staffs, and wearing flower crowns, surrounded the boat and the chariot, followed by a singing and dancing group and musicians, and some people carrying a huge wooden penis behind. In Cerberus's opinion, the composition of this procession should be imitating the story in mythology, that the god of wine Dionysus wandered the earth with Silenus, Satyrs, Pan, and fairies from the mountains, forests, and waters. People held torches and sang dithyrambs. The musicians in the procession played music. The young men in the dance troupe danced. They set out from the swamp and crossed the city to the central square. They sent the statue of Basilina and the god of wine to the Bull Church for the wedding. The celebration lasted until late at night. The people who dispersed did not go home to sleep, but continued to drink on the temporary lounge chairs built on the streets. Cerberus certainly did not participate in drinking. He went home after the wedding. When he arrived at the door of his house, he was startled. There was a person curled up outside his house and sobbed quietly. He was surprised to see with a torch and asked, "Who?" The person looked up, and it turned out to be Fido. Cerberus asked in surprise, "Fido, what's wrong with you?" After not seeing each other for a few years, Fido had grown up a lot, and looked like a teenager. His eyes were red and his face was full of tears. He asked desperately, "Cerberus, can you lend me some money?" Cerberus pulled him up and asked, "What's wrong? Speak slowly." Fido choked up and said, my sister Viratia's master is moving to Corinth and wants to take my sister away. I can't let them take my sister away, otherwise we will never see each other again. I want to redeem her, but I don't have the money." Cerberus asked, "How much does her master want?" Fido said, 120 drachmas. Cerberus frowned slightly and said, "Wait here." He went home and took out a 10 drachma gold coin and handed it to him, saying, "The current exchange rate of gold to silver is 14 per ounce, which is enough to redeem her." Fido was overjoyed, but then he became a little worried and said with some shame, "Is it okay for you to give me such a large sum of money?" In fact, I came to you this afternoon. My master didn't want to lend me money, so I had no choice but to come to you. You were not at home at that time, and your father didn't agree to lend me money. Does he know that you took this money? Cerberus was not surprised at all that Marcutulus was unwilling to give Feder money, but he was a little angry when he heard Feder say that his master was unwilling to lend him money, and asked, "You told Callias about this, and Callias didn't give you money?" Feder shook his head and said, "It's not the male owner, it's the female owner. The male owner is not at home today." But, based on his understanding of the male owner, even if he was at home, he would not lend him money. Callias' shrewdness and stinginess are famous throughout Athens. But Cerberus calmed down his anger when he heard him say this. After the trial that year, Feder seemed very ashamed and kept hiding from Callias. Cerberus did not blame the child who was only about 10 years old at the time and whose sister was still in someone else's hands. He wanted to do something for him, but seeing how awkward he was, he did not force him. He just gave Callias a sum of money and asked him to return him to freedom when Feder was able to be independent, and gave him another sum of money to redeem his sister. Feder just said that, and he thought Callias had some intentions for the money. Cerberus said, "This money is not important. You go and redeem your sister." Feder said with great gratitude, "Thank you, Cerberus. I will definitely pay you back in the future. I'm really sorry about the lawsuit." Cerberus said, "I don't blame you. You saved me when I was in the most dangerous time, and I have always been grateful to you. You don't have to rush to pay back this money. You can come to me when you are in trouble. How do you plan to redeem your sister?" Feder looked at the sky and said, "I want to go now. My sister's master will leave Athens by boat tomorrow. I will go to give him the money now and bring my sister back." Cerberus said, "Are you going alone? There must be witnesses for this kind of thing. Wait a minute." He went home and called out a slave and accompanied Feder to the master's house in Veraceia. However, to their shock, after they went over and knocked on the door for a long time, no one opened it. Finally, the neighbors came out and told them that the family had left Athens by boat today. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 92 Corinth. The boundless deep blue sea covered the deep blue sky, and the wooden sailboat with 20 oars sailed briskly among the waves. The oars hit the water, splashing white waves. The seagulls that followed the sailboat and flew low over the water occasionally saw an opportunity, dived into the water, and picked up a small fish that was dizzy and floating on the water. When Velacia was captured, she was young and didn't remember anything. "We are from Lesbos. My father's name is Pittacus, and he is a nobleman. When I was 8 years old, a large merchant ship came to the island to trade and brought many novel goods. I was so stupid that I secretly took Velacia and a group of children to play on the ship while no one was paying attention. What happened next can be guessed. The ship owner discovered us, but he remained calm and drove the ship away from Lesbos. All of us became his slaves. The owner of the merchant ship did business everywhere, and those companions who were captured with me were sold by him one after another. Vlasha and I were originally sold to a Cretan who came to Athens to do business and brought us to Athens. But later he went bankrupt, and Vlasha and I were sold separately. Vlasha should have lived a princess-like life in Lesbos, but because of my stupidity, she was forced to live in a foreign country as a slave, trembling with fear under the whip of her master every day. I promised her that I would definitely bring her home. Yesterday she suddenly sent someone to bring me a letter saying that her master's family was moving to Corinth and wanted to take her away. I hurried to find her master and asked them not to take Vlasha away. They clearly said that they would leave Athens today, and as long as I could pay 120 drachmas, they would let Vlasha go free. Why did they cheat me? That 120 drachmas could buy 5 girls as old as Vlasha. In the moist and salty sea breeze, Feder told his life story, puzzled by the deception of his sister's master's family. Last night, when he learned that the family had left Athens, he collapsed and fell to his knees, tearing his hair and crying. After Cerberus found out the destination of the family, he sent someone to tell Fido's master, hired sailors overnight, rented boats, prepared water, and left the port for Corinth early this morning. It takes about 2 days to travel from Athens to Corinth by land. The mountain road is rugged and difficult to travel, and there are often robbers in dangerous places. Cerberus chose to go by sea. Fido didn't know why the owner of Lasha went back on his word and left Athens early, but he had some guesses. The owner of Lasha was the parents of the slave trader Xenodus, who tried to kidnap and sell Cerberus. After Cerberus brought Xenodus to court, he was sentenced to death. But before the execution, the Spartans invaded Athens, and he took the opportunity to escape from prison. He fled Athens, and no one knew where he went at first, but in the past 2 years, there have been rumors that he was a pirate on the sea. Xenodus is an only child. His parents are not young anymore. The reason they want to immigrate at this time is nothing more than that their son has established himself outside, and they want to take them to reunite. The reason why his parents changed their minds and left Athens in a hurry is also easy to guess. After all, Xenodus is a fugitive in Athens. They are just afraid that the news about their son will spread and bring him trouble. If the guess is true, this journey is a bit dangerous for Cerberus, because Xenodus must hate him very much. But Cerberus still decided to take this trip. He felt very sorry for Fido. Fido saved him when he was in the most dangerous time, but he just gave Callias a sum of money and did nothing else. If he could pay more attention and make more thorough arrangements, Fido would not have to suffer the pain of separation from his only relative. After listening to Fido's story, he was even more ashamed of his indifference. It was just a piece of cake for him to send Fido and his sister back home. If he had asked a few more questions, Fido and his sister might have been reunited with their relatives by now, instead of wandering around the world like this. He hoped that this time Zao could find Viraxia smoothly. No matter how much it cost, he was willing to help the girl regain her freedom. It only took half a day to reach Corinth by sea. Just at noon, they saw the port of Conchiria in the Saronic Gulf from afar. The prosperous port was full of ships, including various merchant ships of different sizes, and there was a special dock where a huge ship was moored. The hull of the ship was tall and large, and the oars stretched out in several layers. Compared with it, the surrounding ships were like toys. There was no such large ship in the port of Piraeus. After approaching the port and gradually seeing the hull, people who had not been to Corinth were surprised and talked about it. Even Cerberus stared at it with great interest. Seeing this, the old sailor Cordus who accompanied him to the sea introduced, that is a trireme, which requires 170 rowers to row. The speed is as fast as lightning. No ship can beat them on the sea. As they were talking, the small boat they were riding was approaching the dock. There were more and more ships loaded with various goods on the sea. The crew began to row carefully to prevent collisions with other ships. Although Fido was full of worries, he still exclaimed, "This place is more prosperous than Athens." Cordus looked nostalgic and laughed. "Of course, kid. How can Athens compare with this place? This place was a famous place for commercial prosperity hundreds of years ago. Athens has only been prosperous for a few years. People from the Peloponnese go to Thessaly. People from Thessaly go to the Peloponnese. Merchant ships from the Aegean Sea go to the Gulf of Corinth. And merchant ships from the Gulf of Corinth go to the Aegean Sea. All pass through this place. There is a stone towpath that crosses the entire isthmus horizontally. Sea ships going east and west must pass through the towpath. Corinth, it is said that there are 3,000 slaves who specialize in towing ships. This towway alone can collect more than 1 talent in taxes a day. The wealth here is only comparable to Thebes. Everyone who comes here will linger. There are countless brothels and baths here. The temple of Aphrodite on the Acropolis supports 1,000 temple prostitutes, each as beautiful as a goddess. The most famous high-class prostitutes are said to charge 1 talent a night. Look at the words there. It is said that it says happiness always resides here, which is an oracle. If you have money, Corinth is the happiest place in the world. Everyone on the ship looked in the direction he pointed and saw a line of large characters engraved in the most conspicuous place on the rock wall of the harbor. Happiness resides here forever. because this journey might be dangerous. In addition to the hired sailors, the ship also had 6 strong male slaves brought from home by Cerberus, all of whom were carefully trained by Caudles. They had all heard Caudles bragging after drinking, and they all asked in unison, "Caudles, when you were young, you spent 20 money a month here. The women here are really as beautiful as you said." The hired sailors often traveled from Athens to Corinth, and they laughed when they heard their ignorant questions and started to brag about what they had seen and heard here, some of which were true and some were made up, which made them dumbfounded and yearning. The rude sailors would inevitably mix in a lot of dirty jokes when they spoke, and Fido felt a little embarrassed listening to them. Plus, they were about to dock and would be able to visit their sister soon, so he was excited and his face flushed. He whispered to Cerberus, "Cerberus, thank you. Whether I can find Veracia or not, I will repay you, and I'm willing to do anything for you in the future." Cerberus replied, "You don't have to do anything. You saved me first, and this is my repayment. I'm sorry that I didn't care about you more before, but just made some self-righteous arrangements, causing your sister and you to suffer so much hardship again." Fido quickly shook his head and said, "No, no, no, this is not your fault. Although I saved you, I betrayed you later. You're already very magnanimous for not blaming me. I never thought you would do so much for me. If I really had no other way this time, I would never have borrowed money from you. I originally thought you would hate me very much." The closer to the dock, the more boats there were. They were crowded together, and they had to queue up to find a place to moor. They waited for a long time before it was their boat's turn. After tying the boat to the shore, Caudles, who was more familiar with Corinth, arranged to look for people. Last night they had already found out what the ship that Zenodus' parents took to leave Athens looked like, and what kind of people were on the ship. Caudles said, "You all know what the ship we are looking for looks like. Let's split up and look for the sister-in-law's ship at the dock first. We will look for it one by one. It will be easier to find the people on the ship after we find them. The people who manage these moorings must have an impression of them. Brothers, look carefully. My master will definitely reward everyone if we find them." He said the last sentence to the sailors. These sailors were also carefully selected by him. Their skills and backgrounds were absolutely reliable. Cerberus told him about the risks of this trip. If he really met Zenodus here by chance, and he had bad intentions and was strong, he was sure that he could escort Cerberus back to Athens safely from land with these people. Chapter 93 Search. No, there was no ship, like you said yesterday. The ship manager who received the tip thought carefully and said affirmatively. "Why don't you look in the direction of the pier? The light ships from Athens usually stop there." Cerberus thanked him and walked away with Fido, who was disappointed. They had already looked in the direction the manager said, but there was nothing. The people who went to look for it separately came back one after another, and none of them had heard of the ship. Fido's expression had changed from disappointment to anxiety. Cerberus comforted him. Maybe they didn't stay and went directly to the towpath. "Let's go to the towpath to ask." Fido asked anxiously, "Have they left Corinth?" Cerberus said, "Even if the ship left Corinth, it doesn't matter. Didn't you say they were going to move to Corinth? The people must have disembarked. We can slowly look for them. Even if they didn't disembark in Corinth, it doesn't matter. We will continue to chase them, and we will definitely catch up with them. Don't worry." Caudles said, "They won't leave Corinth so soon. The number of ships that can pass through the towpath is limited every day, and they need to queue up. Sometimes the queue can last for more than 10 days. Their ship set out yesterday afternoon, and it should be evening when they arrive in Corinth. Even if they didn't queue up and pass the towpath immediately, no ship would set sail at night. Moreover, the bottom of the ship must be carefully inspected and maintained. After being rubbed on such a long stone towpath, no one dares to let such a ship go to sea immediately. They must still be in Corinth. In order to facilitate the towing of ships, the towpath is directly opposite the dock. The wide and smooth stone road extends from the slope to the water. In this era, such a project can be called spectacular. Cerberus and his party walked up to a man who was standing by the towpath to supervise the ships passing in order. The man said coldly without turning his head, "If you want to cross the towpath, queue up and you can't cut in line." Caudles said, "We are not crossing the towpath. We just want to inquire about something." The man looked at him in surprise this time. Caudles pulled his hand and put a silver coin of 1 drachma into his palm without leaving any trace. The man squeezed it, his face became gentle, and asked, "What do you want to ask?" Caudles described the appearance of the ship they were looking for, and asked if such a ship had passed by since yesterday afternoon. The man shook his head affirmatively and said, "No, I was here to supervise yesterday, and no such ship passed the towpath. You said that the ship arrived yesterday, but it is impossible for it to pass. The ships that want to cross the isthmus have been queued up for 5 days, and they are all very urgent. If there is a ship that cuts in line, I will definitely remember it." Fido was so anxious that he wanted to cry and asked, "That ship, could it be that it didn't come to Collins at all?" Caudles was also a little puzzled and shook his head and said, "No, that ship is different from our ship. It is a passenger ship, not specially rented. The guests on it are not only your sister's master and his family, but also other people who are coming to Collins. It is impossible for them to change their route halfway. Maybe it was anchored in a remote place and we didn't see it. Let's look for it again." However, they searched the dock carefully again, but still couldn't find the ship. They also asked all the hotels in the port, but no guests from the ship came to stay. At this point, Cordless had to admit that the ship might not have really reached Collins. He guessed maybe they stopped somewhere halfway, or some accident caused them to fall behind us. Let's wait and see in Collins. There was no other way, so they found an inn to stay in first. After searching for a long time, the sun was setting. The group was already tired and hungry, so Cerebus ordered a sumptuous dinner and fine wine to reward everyone. He asked the waiter in the inn to deliver dinner to everyone's room, so that everyone could rest directly after the meal. Cerebus, Feder, Caudles, and another slave shared a room. There was fish and meat for dinner. Caudles and the slave ate with relish, but Feder was restless and kept looking at the door of the room, eating without tasting the food. After dinner, Caudles and another slave lay down on the bed to rest, but Feder said, "I'll go out and take a look and get some fresh air." Walked out of the room. Cerebus sat by the bed for a while, then followed him out. Caudles and the slave hurriedly followed him. Their room was on the 2nd floor. Cerebus went downstairs, passed through the noisy lobby, where artists were performing acrobatics, and found Fido at the door of the hotel. Fido was staring at the night outside the hotel in a daze. Corinth was indeed a more prosperous city than Athens. Dusk had fallen, but the port area had not become deserted. Many hotels and inns were brightly lit and open, and the streets were crowded with people. Many of these people were women with heavy makeup and graceful figures. They either walked with men, flirting and laughing wantonly, or they walked alone with maids who were dressed more simply, gracefully walking through the streets. If a man noticed them, they would communicate with their eyes. If the two sides could reach an agreement, they would leave together. If they couldn't reach an agreement, they would separate and look for new targets. A tall beauty passed by the store door. Seeing that Caudles and the slave were staring at her intently, she smiled slightly, winked at them, motioned them to look at the ground, and then walked away swaying her plump hips. Caudles and the slave both swallowed and looked at the ground. There was a line of words printed on the dirt ground where she passed. The slave pointed at the handwriting and exclaimed in a low voice, asking Caudles, "Look, why are there words on the ground? There were none just now." Caudles explained in a low voice, "These are printed on the soles of the shoes of the woman who just passed by. Her shoes are specially made, and there will be such words when she walks over." The slave asked, "What do these words mean?" Cerebus heard their conversation and looked down, and found that it was the word "follow me." Although Caudles was also illiterate, he had lived in Collins and was knowledgeable. When he explained the meaning of the word, the slave laughed foolishly. Fido seemed not to see it, and did not react to it. Cerebus could understand his feelings, but all the comfort at this moment was pale, and he could only stand with him silently. After standing for a long time, Fido said, "Let's go back." The group returned to the room and rested, and there was no conversation all night. Fido got up early the next morning, and went to the dock again to wait and ask. But until noon, there was still no news. Fido held on to a glimmer of hope and said, "Maybe the manager remembered it wrong. The ship has passed the towpath and gone to the port of Lechaeon." So the group followed the 6 or 7 kilometer long towpath across the isthmus. to look for the port of Lechaeon on the other side of the Gulf of Corinth. However, after searching the entire port, there was still no sign of the ship. They had to accept the fact that the ship did not come to Corinth. Just as Cerberus and Caudles were discussing the return trip along the coastline to see if they had landed somewhere on the way, a sailor accidentally heard news about what seemed to be the ship while eating. A ship from Athens ran aground near Salamis and was smashed to pieces. I heard that many people died. There was a famous fried egg restaurant in Lechaeon port, and the sailor would always try it when he had the chance when he came to Corinth. While Cerberus and Caudles were discussing things, he sneaked out to buy fried eggs, and while waiting in line, he accidentally overheard the conversation between the two people in front of him. He was startled and quickly interrupted and asked, "Really? When did it happen?" The man who spoke looked at him and said, "It's true. It happened 2 days ago. A ship passed by Salamis Island yesterday morning and rescued a person trapped on the reef." That's what the man said. The sailor asked, "What did the man say? What's his name? How did the ship hit the reef? And when did it happen?" The man asked curiously, "Do you know anyone on the ship?" The sailor said, "I have a sister who may be on the ship." "When did the ship leave Athens?" The man said sympathetically, "I don't know, but the man is in a doctor's clinic in Cancria port. He fell into the water and was frozen on the reef for a night, and he got sick. I can take you to find him." The sailor ran to tell Cerberus the news. After hearing this, Fedor's legs went weak, and he knelt on the ground. Cerberus' heart sank, but he still comforted him. It may not be that ship. Besides, didn't someone get rescued? Veracia will be fine. They asked the man to lead the way and quickly returned to Cancria port to find the man in the clinic. The man's name was Enleitz, an olive oil merchant. He lost all his goods and fell ill in a foreign land. He was heartbroken and exhausted. When Cerberus asked about what happened that day, he was filled with remorse. "Our ship left Athens 2 days ago in the afternoon. Now that I think about it, I was really crazy. How could I go out to sea in the afternoon? Our ship was supposed to leave yesterday morning, but 2 days ago at noon, the ship owner Alex suddenly sent a slave to ask me if I wanted to leave early. If I leave early, he will exempt me from 1/5 of the fare. I just wanted to take advantage of this little bit. Originally, my goods were worth at least 750 drachmas. This is all my assets, and part of the payment is a loan. What should I do?" As he said this, he beat his head in pain. The doctor's assistant was listening to their conversation at the door of the ward. Hearing this, he interrupted and said, "You should think about what to do with your medical fees first. The person who sent you here yesterday didn't pay for your medical fees. The food you have been eating for the past 2 days was all from me. If you don't pay, we will throw you out." After saying this, he deliberately looked at Cerberus and his group. He wanted to hint that Cerberus and others should help Enleitz pay for the medical fees, but Cerberus and Enleitz were not in the mood to pay attention to him at the moment. Fedor asked nervously, "Who are the people on your ship? Is there a little girl with black curly hair and big eyes about 8 or 9 years old? She should be with a couple in their 60s. You are an Athenian. Do you know Charaxus, the name of Zenodus' father? She may be with Charaxus and his wife." After saying this, Fedor stared at Enleitz closely, hoping that he would immediately deny that he had not seen them on the ship. But to his disappointment, Enleitz said bitterly, "There was such a little girl among the slaves brought by old Charaxus and his wife. I heard that the ship set off early because of his request. If the ship had not left early, this would not have happened." Fedor's eyes went dark, and he fell to the ground with a thud. Chapter 94 Loyalty. Fedor. Cerb squatted down to check on him. Fiado was just dizzy for a moment. With his help, he sat up and said, "I'm fine." He asked Enleitz in a trembling voice, "How did your ship hit the reef? You were rescued, and the little girl must have been rescued too, right? She can swim, and she swims very well." Enleitz looked at him, understood a little, and said with pity, "I don't know, maybe. We had passed Salamis at that time, and a strong wind suddenly blew on the sea. 2 days ago in the afternoon, the 50-odd ship that Enleitz and others took set off from Athens. After passing Salamis, a strong wind suddenly blew on the sea. The ship did not dare to continue to move forward rashly and returned to Salamis to take shelter from the wind. However, it was late at night and visibility was low. The ship was accidentally hit by a submerged reef, and all the people on the ship fell into the water. The wind was strong and the waves were high, and Leitz was lucky enough to hold onto a broken plank and drifted for a long time before drifting to another reef. He froze on the reef for a night and was rescued by a passing ship the next day. He had no idea what happened to the others. Fido refused to give up hope and grabbed Cerebus's hand and pleaded, "Maybe my sister is okay." Cerebus comforted him, "I know, let's go look for her again." Cordulus carefully asked about the location of the sea where they had the accident. Cerebus paid for the medical expenses of Leitz and left him a small sum of money, and the group left the clinic. When everyone walked out of the clinic, the wings of the goddess of night had covered the earth again. Cordulus stopped, looked at Fido with a warning in his eyes, and said to Cerebus, "My little master, although we have news about the little girl, we cannot sail at night. It is too dangerous. The ship of Lalix is a lesson for us." Although Fido wanted to fly to the place where the accident happened immediately, he was already grateful for what Cerebus had done for his brother and sister, and he did not dare to ask Cerebus to take risks for his sister with so many people. When he met Cordal's eyes, he forced a smile and said, "Yes, Cerebus, it's been 2 days. If Veracia was going to be in trouble, it would have happened long ago. There's no need to rush tonight." Cerebus thought that, even if he risked going out to sea, it would be late at night when he arrived at the designated sea area. With the current lighting conditions, he couldn't see anything clearly and couldn't start rescue. He said, "Then we will set off tomorrow morning. Cordals, please go to the dock and rent 10 ships that are familiar with the sea area from Corinth to Athens, and go with us to search and rescue tomorrow. In addition, spread the news and help us find Veracia and send her to me. Whether she lives or dies, I will reward her with 20 minas. The maximum reward for a sailor going out to sea for a day is 1 drachma, and 20 minas is 1,200 drachmas. Ordinary sailors have to go without food and drink for 4 or 5 years to save up. Many people may not be able to earn so much money in their lifetime." Fido exclaimed, "Cerebus." Cordals also said anxiously, "Young master." The other slaves and sailors were all in a commotion. Cordras felt that the young master made money easily, so he did not take the money seriously. He pulled him aside and stopped him, saying, "Young master, how can you explain to your father if you do this? Besides, is this kid worth doing this? I heard that he betrayed you." Fedor blushed and lowered his head. Cerebus said, "But he also saved me when I was in the most dangerous time. When I was 7 years old, I was almost kidnapped by slave traders. He held the slave traders back regardless of the danger and shouted for help to save me. We didn't even know each other at that time. I have always remembered his kindness and vowed to repay him." He moved his eyes from Cordras to the other slaves, raised his voice and said, "I will remember those who have helped me and will definitely repay them. The same goes for those who are loyal to me. I know that everyone's minds have been a little unstable recently because my father retired and went home, and I'm less than 10 years old. You don't know who will be in charge in the future. During this period, some of you should have had contact with my father. You should know that he is not a kind master. I won't say any more unnecessary words. I just want you to think about whether my father needs you and what can he give you. Although I'm only 9 years old, I can say without modesty that most of the wealth of the Marcutulus family is my credit. If you don't believe it, you can ask Megana, Hermotimus and others for confirmation. If my father is the master of the family, you can only be ordinary slaves. He may even think that some people are redundant and sell those he thinks are useless. But if you are loyal to me, everyone will be my brother and sibling. Everything I did for Fedor today, I will do for each of you in the future, and even more. But the premise is that I only want absolute loyalty and regard my will above everything else, including my father. Plato will start lending money to foreign countries soon. You know how profitable this business is. My promise is not empty words. My ambition is not only in Athens. You are far from enough for me. I will definitely need to add a lot of people in the future. Follow me and be loyal to me. You can get more than just wealth." Although he is young, he speaks in a calm tone and with great momentum. People dare not underestimate him. He has a strange appeal. Several slaves were bought by him personally. They have witnessed how he runs his family business. They have confidence in him. Their eyes are shining, and their blood is boiling. The hired sailors have never seen such a young child speak like this. They thought it was a bit strange, but they couldn't help but envy these slaves as they listened. Fedor murmured in shock, Cerberus. Cadellus first drew out a dagger and cut his palm and swore to the sky. Cadellus swears to the eldest daughter of Oceanus and Tethys and to the goddess of hatred Styx that from now on, Cerberus is my only master and his will is like the will of God to me. Disobeying his will is equivalent to disobeying God. Unless the iron floats on the sea, this oath will not change. If I violate it, let the goddess of hatred punish me by falling into a terrifying dream and never waking up. This shrewd old sailor had carefully observed Marcutus after he retired and returned home, and was sure that he would not be a lenient master, and that he would be useless to him. He was already old, and Marcutus would not support people for free. He had long understood that Cerberus was his only support. So when Cerberus offered a huge reward just now, he spoke out loyally to advise. Cerberus wanted to subdue the slaves he brought out, and he immediately responded first, setting an example for these people. These slaves were trained by him personally and believed in him. Seeing him like this, they immediately rushed to swear an oath to be loyal to Cerberus. Cerberus was very satisfied and swore not to treat them unfairly. He also said to the sailors, if we are lucky, our ship can find Vlasia, and I will reward you handsomely. The sailors had a deep understanding of his generosity during the 2 days of traveling together. They cheered immediately after hearing his words. It only takes half a day to travel from Corinth to Athens by water, and larger fishing boats can travel back and forth. Cordelius went to the dock where the news spread the fastest to release the news of the reward, and the port of Kenkrea was immediately a sensation. The next morning, in addition to the ship rented by Cerberus, there were at least 100 or 200 small boats going to Salamis to try their luck. Although most of these ships were small merchant ships and fishing boats rowed by 1 or 2 sailors, it didn't take a big ship to travel between Corinth and Athens. Cerberus rented a large ship and brought many people with him out of safety considerations. These ships combed the waters near Salamis Island like combing hair, but still could not find Vlasia. Chapter 95, Fighting for the Right to Speak. Vlasia huddled beside the pile of cables in fear, listening to the vicious pirate with one eye blind standing on the deck and roaring, why are these things still here? Throw them into the sea to feed the fish. These things he was talking about were the several dead bodies on the deck. 3 days ago, his parents left Athens on a 50-odd ship to go to sea to move to Corinth, but the ship hit a reef near Salamis Island, and all the people fell into the water and their whereabouts were unknown. The pirate got the news the next day and gathered many ships to search the sea repeatedly for 2 days and 2 nights regardless of the danger. He only found the remains of several passengers who died, and Vlasia, who was lucky enough to drift to the seaside by grabbing a large plank and lying on it. Pirates make a living on the sea and understand how dangerous the sea is. In this weather, the night at sea is very cold. His parents are old and can't swim, so there is almost no chance of survival if they fall into the sea. His parents left Athens and went to Corinth to reunite with him, but they didn't expect to lose their lives on the way. He was filled with anger, but he had no place to vent it. The damn idiot captain had already died, and even his body was not found. He watched his men throw the body into the sea with a plop, plop, and could only grit his teeth and hate the boy who had harmed his family like this, Cerberus. He was the beginning of all the bad luck. He forced him to flee Athens, survived a life-threatening situation at sea, and even lost an eye. If he could not return to Athens, his parents would not have to move, and all this would not have happened. He swore to take revenge and make that boy live a life worse than death. He pulled out the dagger from his waist and stuck it on the side of the ship, spitting out the name from between his teeth, Cerberus. A pirate lifted Vlasia over like a cat and asked the one-eyed pirate, "Boss, what should we do with this little girl?" The one-eyed pirate stared at her coldly for a while and asked her, "Why didn't you drown?" Vlasia was trembling with fear, thinking that he would say in the next moment, "Throw her into the sea too." But in the end he just said, "Take her away." The bronze ram of the double-decker pirate ship broke through the morning mist, passed by a wooden sailing ship with 50 oars, and sailed into the depths of the vast ocean. The people on the two ships looked at each other from a distance, and they didn't know that there was someone very important to them on the other ship. Feder and Cerberus did not know that the Veracia they had been looking for was right in front of them. Veracia did not know that her brother, whom she had called out to thousands of times in her heart with tears, was only a few dozen oars away from her. The one-eyed pirate did not know that Cerberus, whom he hated so much, was on the wooden sailing ship opposite, which his companions judged from the draft depth that it was not worth the effort, because it had no goods. After the search in the waters near Salamis was fruitless, Cerberus took Feder and others to wait in Corinth for 2 more days, but no one brought good news. Veracia seemed to be really doomed. They returned to Athens, leaving the address of Plato, and spreading the news that as long as there was news about Veracia, it would be sent to this place, and the reward would still be valid. After returning to Athens, Cerberus asked Callias to release Feder from slavery and give him freedom, and proposed to send him back to Lesbo Island to let him find his parents, but Feder refused. The disappearance of Veracia was a great blow to him. He dared not go home. He was afraid to face his mother's disappointed eyes and afraid that he would not know how to answer when she asked him, "Where is your sister?" Cerberus could not solve his problem, nor did he want to make a decision for him rashly. He sent him to Prato so that he could work and earn money to be independent. There were many useful things to learn in Prato. Feder desperately immersed himself in it and studied with a self-torturing intensity, hoping to escape from the terrible guilt for a moment. When he was extremely tired, Cerberus took people to Corinth without asking for the consent of Marcutulis. After returning, he complained a lot. He did not know the specific cost of the trip and the huge reward for the trip, and he would be even more angry when he knew it. But Cerberus did not ask the slaves who accompanied him to keep it secret, because there was no point. First, the hired sailors would not listen to his orders, and second, the news of the reward must be spread, otherwise it would be meaningless. He and Marcutulis were like two lions on the same territory. Unless one of them surrendered completely, a conflict would break out sooner or later, either for this, or for something else. Marcutulis, who was in his prime, certainly did not want to give up the dominance of the family to his son, who was less than 10 years old. Cerberus would never let Marcutulis give orders blindly, and was ready to clash with Marcutulis. But to Cerberus's surprise, the news did not seem to reach Marcutulis' ears until the Great Dionysian Festival arrived. When the Great Dionysian Festival arrived, the city of Athens was crowded with people who came from the countryside and distant foreign countries to participate in the celebration. All the restaurants and hotels were full, and they took the opportunity to raise their prices. The weavers of Marcutulis' family worked non-stop throughout the winter and spring, and saved up a lot of goods, which were snapped up by people who had long admired them within a few days. Marcutulis was so dizzy with the money that he did not feel it was real. Although everyone told him that his family had made a fortune in the past 2 years, he actually had never seen much cash. Touching these hard coins that could be piled up, he felt like he was in a dream for several days. Marcutulis slept with his cash box in his arms. The more money there was in the cash box, the more reluctant he was to take out a single coin. When Ganjara asked him for money to buy food, he felt heartbroken and kept asking for money, which made the family's food suddenly drop several levels. After the carpet stock was emptied, Cerberus asked him how much he had sold in total this time. He asked vigilantly, "Why are you asking this?" Cerberus replied, "The spring wool is about to be collected. I have to calculate how much the raw materials and labor costs for this season are. I know how much money it is, and I have an idea in my mind." This was a very legitimate reason. Although Marcutulis was reluctant, he knew that this was necessary, and he couldn't do it himself, so he had to tell him. However, he asked Cerberus to explain the details of each expense clearly, wanting to learn secretly. Cerberus did not refuse, and counted each expense of collecting wool, washing wool, combing wool, spinning, dyeing, and weaving in front of him. Marcutulis was very smart. Every time he mentioned an item, he would ask how much the item cost last season. The price of raw wool calculated by Cerberus was higher than last year. He hurriedly asked, "The raw wool you calculated is more expensive than last year. Why? Do you know that the shepherds are going to raise the price? You are young and don't understand. Don't be fooled by them. We are the only one in Athens that collects coarse wool. If we don't collect it, no one will want it. They have no choice but to raise the price. We can't let them ask for a high price. Cerberus said, now we are not the only one who collects coarse wool, father. Carpet weaving is not difficult. Imitation products have already appeared in the city half a year ago. There are only so many sheep farmers in Athens. This season, someone must be competing with us for raw materials. The price I estimated is already very low. Marcutalus said unhappily, didn't you buy so many people to guard the house? Why did you let others learn our money making skills? Cerberus explained calmly, father, carpets are so simple. People can understand them after buying them and opening them. It was not easy for us to keep it secret until half a year ago. If we had not sold them to distant sea merchants in the previous few times, we would not have been able to keep it secret until half a year ago. Marcutalus frowned and said, why don't you continue to sell them to sea merchants? Cerberus laughed and said, of course, even if we sell them to sea merchants, people who want to imitate them can buy them from sea merchants. Marcutalus had nothing to say. The two continued to calculate the expenses. When Cerberus calculated the monthly salary for weavers and dyers and their expenses for food, clothing, housing and transportation, Marcutalus had another opinion. Why do you have to pay your own slaves for their work? And you have to feed and house them so well, which is better than most free people. Do we have too much money to spend? What does Gangula do? You don't care about you. Cerberus had been talking to him for a long time, actually just to talk about this, and now he finally got to the point. Chapter 96, Stinginess. Cerberus said, father, I plan to give weavers and dyers a bonus in addition to their wages for doing a good job starting from this season. Marcutalus stood up and shouted, are you crazy? Cerberus said, father, do you know how many people are selling carpets besides us during this Dionysian festival? Marcutalus didn't want to pay attention to him at first, but this question really concerned him. After hesitating for a while, he asked coldly, how many? Cerberus reported 3 names. Marcutalus was so angry that he cursed, these shameless thieves. Every person who secretly learned the carpet weaving skills was stealing money from his pocket, and his heart was bleeding. But the 3 people Cerberus mentioned were nobles of Athens, and he couldn't afford to offend them. Their families were deeply rooted in Attica, and they could only suffer this loss. Marcutalus was so angry that his liver was about to explode. Cerberus said, the trouble these thieves bring us is not just as simple as stealing business. These 3 families have large estates and raise a large number of sheep. In previous years, a large part of our raw wool was collected from there. It is conceivable that we will not be able to collect it this season, and we must be prepared that the estates that are friendly with them will not sell to us. Athens is such a small place, and these old families are all related to each other. This year we may not be able to collect even half of the coarse wool. Marcutalus was shocked. He had never expected that there was such a big crisis hidden under the seemingly thriving business at home. He thought this was a hen that would lay golden eggs and bring huge profits year after year, but he didn't expect that this hen seemed to have a lifespan of only a few years. He asked in panic, what should we do, Cerberus? Cerberus said, this is why I treat dyers and weavers well. Marcutalus was extremely puzzled. What's the connection? Cerberus said, we will definitely lose a large part of the raw material share, but the carpet business is not dead. Pottery is also produced in other places. Why is Athens pottery the most popular, and merchants are willing to come all the way to transport them and sell them? Because Athens pottery is the most exquisite, and no other place can compare. The same is true for the carpet business. Again, Athens is so small, how many families can afford to buy carpets? So many carpets are woven, and they must be sold mainly to merchants. But carpet weaving is such a simple craft, and Athenians can imitate it, so can outsiders. If carpets are produced elsewhere, how can we make merchants willing to buy our carpets? Of course, ours is the most exquisite, and others can't imitate it. Marcutalus said, then there is no need to serve those slaves like kings, just supervise them to do a better job. Cerberus said, father, when our family was in the bakery business, did you have to keep an eye on the slaves while they were working to prevent them from being lazy, not working carefully, or wasting raw materials? Marcutulus said without hesitation. Yes, these slaves are all bad guys. They never take the master's work seriously and only know how to steal and waste things. Cerberus said, now we have 40 or 50 slaves, and the workplaces are divided into several places. Can you keep an eye on each of them? Marcutulus paused and said, there are only a few dozen people. Let your mother and Megana watch the female slaves, and I will watch the dyers. What can't I watch? Cerberus said, Father, you know the price of dyes. If the dyers do something wrong during work, we will lose more than the money we give them. You also know how slow the carpets are woven. If the weavers are unwilling, dawdle a little, waste some things, or make some mistakes on purpose, how many carpets can we produce in a season? Why save on these small things? Wouldn't it be better to treat them well, and let them work willingly? Marcutulus disagreed with this statement. Cerberus, you think too well. The slaves are all lazy. Without the whip, they will not work hard for their masters. It's useless even if you treat them well. Cerberus said, so, I want to use rewards, to make them treat their master's work as their own. I plan to set a standard for the dyers starting from this season. How much dye should be used to dye a certain amount of colored yarn. Slaves who do it can get paid, and those who do better than the requirements will be rewarded, and those who do worse will have their wages deducted. Any dyer who dyes a new color will also be rewarded. The same is true for weavers weaving carpets. A certain amount will be set according to the time. Those who don't weave enough will be punished, and those who weave faster will be rewarded. In this way, they are actually working for themselves, and they will definitely not be careless anymore. You and your mother can save a lot of effort, and the work can be completed quickly and well. Isn't it great? Marcutulus thought that this way there would be no more slaves being lazy, but he really couldn't bear to spend the money. After struggling for a long time, he said, let me think about it again. Cerberus didn't force him. He smiled and said, then think about it again, Father. It would not be a bad idea to let Marcutulus lower the treatment of the slaves for a short period of time, so that those slaves who were distracted and wanted to rely on Marcutulus after his retirement would have their heads cleared. This would help them to recognize what kind of person this male master is, and whether he is worthy of relying on him. He was not worried that Marcutulus would not agree with his suggestion in the end, because if that happened, he would soon find that few slaves in the house were willing to work for him again. At dawn, the huge open-air theater that could accommodate 6,000 spectators was already full. The Theban sat in a seat in the last row, wiping the sweat from his forehead, and said to his companion, it's so crowded. The tickets we bought at a high price are still in such a bad position. We don't want to hear anything later. The companion replied, don't complain. We are lucky to be able to buy tickets to get in. Don't you see how many people outside want to buy but can't buy? Thanks to your slave's cleverness, he knew to buy from someone who had bought tickets. Otherwise we would have rushed to Athens from such a far place, and didn't even see a tragedy, which would be a big loss. I never thought that there would be so many people attending the Dionysia festival in Athens, said Euryphion. These days, there have been so many ships coming here from Corinth. The excitement is comparable to that of the Isthmian Games. Fortunately, we came early and booked a hotel. If we were later, we would have to find a place to set up a tent, or live in the open air on the street like some people do. His companion shook his head and said, Athens is still not prosperous enough. In Thebes or Corinth, this kind of situation would never happen. Euryphion said proudly, how can such a small place be compared with Thebes? It is already quite good to have such an atmosphere. His companion agreed, that's true. In Thebes, only Sparta can compete with us in terms of military strength, and only Corinth can compete with us in terms of trade. It is not reasonable for this small country place to compete with us. The two did not speak in Attic, otherwise the Athenians around them would understand, and would definitely fight with them. Just as the two were being proud of themselves, some people walked onto the stage. Chapter 97 Tragedy Performance, Part 1. Citizens, guests from distant territories, guests from foreign lands. According to the order decided by the lottery yesterday, today we will perform 3 tragedies written by Aeschylus, Thetis, Achilles, and Odysseus, and a goat-mad drama The Girl in the Palace of Hylas. A young man stood in the center of the stage gracefully, and introduced the content of the tragedy to be performed today. His voice was clearly transmitted to the last row by the ingenious building. Oh, Euphorion whispered, "What a young poet. Athens actually chose the works of such a young poet. I wonder what his literary talent is like." His companion widened his eyes to see the poet's appearance and said, "Such a young poet. If his works are not so good that people can ignore his age, then there is really no talent in a small place like Athens." After the young man introduced the plot, he walked off the stage. Several people carried several props on the stage, including a gorgeous couch, a cradle, and an exquisite table, and spread a very beautiful thick velvet blanket with laurel and flower patterns on the ground. The theater was half bowl-shaped, with the stage being the lowest point. Everyone could see the carpet clearly, and the theater was buzzing with amazement. "That's a carpet. Such a beautiful fabric is actually laid on the ground for people to step on." The prop setters arranged the props to look like a gorgeous bedroom, and then stepped off the stage. The accompanying musicians played melodious music, and a chorus danced onto the stage. The 12 men in the chorus were all dressed up as goddesses, wearing masks with feminine features on their faces, beautiful robes of different colors, gold belts for their hair, and various luxurious jewels on their bodies. The theater was in an uproar again, and some people were in an uproar because of the gorgeous scene. The fabric with such bright colors was not cheap, and the 12 sets of clothes were all new, and the actors were wearing them very well. It was obvious that they were made specifically for this performance, and they definitely cost a lot of money. In addition to the expensive jewels they wore, and the props on the stage, most of the audience had never seen such a luxurious scene in their lives. Moreover, according to common sense, the actors of the 4 performances would not have only this set of costumes and props. The sponsor of this performance was surprisingly generous. Even Alphrion was surprised, and said to his companion, "I can't believe that the Athenians are so rich." Many people also focused on other things. A boy sitting in the front row of the theater heard someone next to him ask, "Why wear a mask?" In the past, actors in tragedy performances never wore masks on their faces. He covered his eyes a little speechlessly. No one knows the reason for this innovation better than him. He is the sponsor of the 4 performances today, Cerberus. A few days ago, after the costumes were made, the actors tried them on. Other clothes were fine. Although the women's clothes were made beautifully, because all the actors were men and had beards, the picture after they put them on was really unbearable. He suggested that the actors shave their beards and use cosmetics to make a soft makeup to make the appearance more coordinated, but all the actors refused like a cat whose tail was stepped on, as if his suggestion was so insulting and incredible. Even Aeschylus was the same. He explained to Cerberus how important beards were to a man's physical beauty, and how they were an important part of his masculinity. Only those who were as shy as women would pluck their beards. He pointed out that Cerberus's suggestion was very rude. Cerberus took them to a fountain without saying anything, and let them see their reflections. As they walked towards the fountain, everyone who saw them pointed at them and laughed. They looked at their reflections and laughed themselves. Cerberus waited for them to stop laughing, and asked them if the audience would still enjoy the tragedy with such actors. Aeschylus admitted that this was a big distraction from the content of his work. But they still refused to shave their beards, and finally came up with this compromise, wearing masks to hide their beards. The audience didn't know why, and had various speculations about this. The discussion was so loud that it drowned out the music until the chorus sang the entrance song in unison, and the theater was quiet again. The entrance song describes the grand wedding of the goddess Thetis and the hero Peleus, as well as the happiness of this marriage and Thetis' newborn son. As the chorus sang, another actor dressed as a goddess came onto the stage holding a swaddling cloth. This goddess's dress was more outstanding than the other actors. She wore an embroidered belt, a golden snake-shaped armband on her bare arm, and a multi-layered geometric necklace with gemstones and glass beads around her neck. It was not inappropriate to say that she was dressed like a goddess. Although she was tall, her manners were very graceful, like a real woman of noble birth. After the chorus finished singing, she responded to them tenderly and expressed her incomparable love for her newborn son. The verses sung by the chorus and Thetis were very beautiful, with strict rhythm, elegant words, and sincere and moving emotions. Many audiences who watched the two songs with a critical attitude because the playwright was too young could not help but admit that the organizing committee did not randomly select people. Of course, there were also unconvinced audiences. For example, a poet's friend who always got a place in the competition in previous years said unconvincedly, "It's just average, not better than your work." What kind of vision did the people in the organizing committee have to give a place to this young boy? The poet said in an ambiguous way, "Look further back." His friend turned his eyes to the stage again. After looking at it for a moment, he couldn't help but sigh again. The Mercutius family is really rich. Why weren't the sponsors so generous when your plays were performed before? While this man was regretting, Mercutius, who was sitting next to Cerberus, couldn't help but whispered to his son, "How much did it cost to sponsor this performance?" Cerberus reported the number, about 800 drachmas. Mercutius shouted, 800 drachmas, are you crazy? The people around were startled by his shout and looked here. The person sitting next to Mercutius asked with great interest, "What do you mean by 800 drachmas, Mercutius? You sponsored Aeschylus' play for 800 drachmas?" Yesterday, before the public lottery in the theater, to decide the order of performance of the three playwrights' works, Mercutius and the other two chorus sponsors, as well as the envoys of the vassal states holding tributes, and orphans whose fathers died in the war, walked around the theater under the guidance of the Archon of the Names and many dignitaries. All Athenian citizens and foreigners who came to participate in the Dionysian festival knew him. In his speech before the lottery, the Archon of the Names had specially praised the three of them. It can be said that they were in great glory. Mercutius had never been so popular and respected. He had been feeling proud since the lottery. When Cerberus announced this number, all his confusion was immediately blown away. Mercutius wanted to yell at the prodigal son, but in public, everyone had been respectful and flattering to him before, so he didn't want to lose his dignity immediately, so he had to force his smile to his neighbor and acquiesce. A man two rows behind them observed this, and laughed in a low voice, clapping his thighs with great pride. 800 drachmas, this time they actually spent 800 drachmas. Chapter 98 Tragedy Performance, Part 2. His companion praised, "Your idea is quite mean. Just one sentence made people spend 800 drachmas. I really want to go to the front and take a closer look at the face of the Euboean countryman at this time." After the two men finished laughing, the first person said unsatisfiedly, "This is just a small fight. We still have to think of a serious idea to bring down that damn plateau. Currency exchange is a good business, and we can't let that bread vendor monopolize it." His companion smiled maliciously and said, "Don't worry, we have plenty of opportunities. I just got the news that Plato is starting to lend money outside." The first person's eyes lit up and said, "They actually want to lend money at high interest rates. The greedy Euboeans are not afraid of choking to death. This time, we will give him a big one." The chorus on the stage told the goddess the famous prophecy, and the goddess fell into sadness. The long duet lyrics of both sides were fluent and gorgeous, and the metaphors, parallelism, contrast, and intersection were very wonderful. After the goddess expressed her determination to save her son from that terrible fate, the chorus left the stage and the scenery on the stage was changed to the background of the palace on the island of Hylas. Unlike the goddess's luxurious bedroom, the scenery of the palace of Hylas was rough and majestic, with a throne covered with animal skins, several guards in armor, and a large carpet on the ground, but the pattern on the carpet was the goddess of hunting holding a bow and arrow chasing prey. Thetis entrusted her son to King Hylas, and the king promised to raise him as a girl and keep him away from weapons. In the process of Thetis and the king's communication, Aeschylus made some innovations that seemed very novel to people at that time. He did not perform all in singing, but let the goddess and the king have some dialogues. The audience, who were used to the tragedy performance from beginning to end, felt a little uncomfortable at first, but after getting used to it, they found it interesting, and even felt that it was more immersive than singing. The first tragedy, Thetis, had 3 sets of scenery: Thetis' bedroom, Scylla's palace, the courtyard where Achilles and his female companions played, and 25 sets of costumes. The second tragedy, Achilles, had 3 sets of scenery: the tent of the commander Agamemnon, the tent of Achilles, and the battlefield under the city of Troy, with 15 sets of armor, more than 30 weapons and shields, and 3 chariots. The third tragedy, Odysseus, had only 1 set, but the scene was not small at all. The entire stage was covered with deep and light blue cloth, which acted as river water. Several tall poplars were painted black, and stood upright in a staggered manner, perfectly creating a gloomy underworld scene that made people feel cold at the sight. If the performance time was not in the sunny afternoon, accompanied by the sad music specially made by the musicians for this scene, the audience in the theater would have been scared away. The scenery of the last Goatman play was the courtyard of the palace of Skotjarland. Apart from some specially made goat horns and tails, and a few deerskin coats, nothing else was used. But even so, there were 60 or 70 sets of costumes for the performance that day, plus various exquisite and luxurious props, which were enough to dazzle and astonish all the audience who watched the performance. No one, whether Athenians or foreigners who came from afar, had ever seen such a handicraft. When Marcutulus saw the end, he was almost having a heart attack, because of the endless changes of props and costumes. Others saw them as beautiful stage costumes, but he saw them as his money bag that was pouring out of money. He held his chest and asked Cerberus, did it really only cost 800 drachmas for these 4 performances? Cerberus said, less than 800 drachmas. Many props were borrowed, and many were made by ourselves. For example, the fabrics were all dyed by our own dyeing workshop, and the cost was not much. Marcutulus said in a trembling voice, that's good, that's good. These fabrics and clothes can be sold after cleaning up, and some money can be collected. He tried to comfort himself, telling himself that the money had been spent anyway, and could not be taken back, so he should not think about it anymore. He was afraid that, if he thought too much, he would be heartbroken and die here soon. Among the people present, there were those who had the same idea as Marcutulus. Those who had gloated after hearing that Marcutulus' family had spent 800 drachmas were also shocked by this unprecedented extravagance and asked doubtfully, did these 4 performances really only cost 800 drachmas? His companions looked at him with burning eyes and said greedily, I heard that Marcutulus' family also has a dyeing factory. Maybe they didn't count the cost of clothes and fabrics. This Ubaean family is really rich. Except for the evil people with bad intentions, the rest of the audience was simply shocked by the novelty and luxury of these performances. What was new was the performance style, the innovation of dialogue and masks, and the excellent writing of Aeschylus' script. The protagonist was pushed step by step towards the irresistible tragedy of fate, which was reasonable and shocking. The actors' performances were all devoted, allowing the audience to enjoy a double feast of spirit and vision. Needless to say, the luxury was not so extravagant. Many important Thanksgiving ceremonies held by many city-states with the whole country's strength were not so extravagant. After the performance that day, people all over Athens were talking about it. People focused on 2 points. First, Aeschylus was really talented, and his innovative new performance style was much better than the original one. Second, the Marcutuli family was really rich. How much did they spend this time? Some guessed 1,000 drachmas, some guessed 2,000, and there was an exaggerated rumor that it was 1 talent. Those who heard the conversation between Cerberus and his son told the real number, but no one believed it, because it was obvious that the price of the jewelry worn by the actors when they were dressed as goddesses was far more than this number, even if they were not purchased specifically for these performances. The fact that the Marcutuli family could afford so many jewelry can also be imagined how amazing their wealth is. After the performance that day, no one paid attention to the tragedy performances on the second and third days, and even the comedy performances that followed, even though some of the works were excellent. People talked about every detail of the first day's performance with great relish, including the goddesses' clothes and jewelry, the heroes' armor and weapons, the carpets and furnishings of different patterns in Thetis' bedroom, Cirrus' palace, Agamemnon's tent, and Achilles' tent. What Cerberus didn't expect was that his dyeing workshop took this opportunity to clear out a lot of inventory and received a large number of orders. The goddess's beautiful clothes and the large amount of blue cloth used as the sticks served as a live advertisement for the dyeing workshop, making it famous all at once. In addition to this unintentional gain, the carpets of the Mercutuli family also became famous again. In this sailing season, Athens already had imitation carpets for sale, but this tragedy performance directly displayed the products of the Mercutuli family in front of people. The exquisiteness of the carpets was not comparable to those crude imitations, and it simply and rudely told everyone that their carpets were authentic. Although the city of Athens was already buzzing with talk of the Mercutulus after the tragedy, Cerberus still hired a group of people to spread the word about the wealth of the Mercutulus and Plato's power, as well as the miraculous rumors about himself, in an attempt to implant this brand in the minds of the Athenians and foreign merchants who came to Athens. He even deliberately had people make up the rumors to be more tortuous and bizarre, hoping that the news would spread overseas and, preferably, be brought back to his hometown by the sea merchants. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 99, Stadium, Part 1. The atmosphere in the Panathenaean Stadium, 1, was somewhat unusual today. Whether people were exercising, walking around the stadium, chatting, talking about their speeches and poems, or playing music, they all looked towards the direction of the altar of Eris, the god of love. There, a group of naked boys aged 13 or 14 were warming up before the race under the guidance of their teacher. However, people were not paying attention to them because they were naked. Everyone who was exercising in the stadium was naked. People were looking there because one of the boys was so beautiful. He had black hair and smooth skin. His eyes were as quiet and deep as a deep pool in the dense forest. With his straight nose and rosy lips, his face looked as if it had been kissed by the god of love. His body was also very beautiful. His limbs were well proportioned and slender. Although he did not have the beautiful muscles that adults had carefully trained, he was as tall as a poplar when he was still, and as agile and graceful as a leopard when he moved. Every move made people unable to take their eyes away. Around him were a group of naked companions, and behind him was the latest masterpiece of the famous sculptor Ptolemaides, a beautiful marble statue of Eris. When the statue was first placed in the stadium, it caused a sensation because the sculptor used a new technique to create the statue. Unlike the stiff and rigid statues of other gods, this little Eris statue looked like a real person, with a sly smile on the corners of its lips, a bow and arrow in one hand, and plump skin that seemed to breathe. After the statue was placed in the stadium, it received countless praises. People either praised it directly, or wrote poems, and composed music for it. Everyone admired the sculptor's exquisite craftsmanship, and admitted that the little Eris living on Mount Olympus should look like this. But the boy stood there, and his companions, who should have been praised as beautiful boys by others, and the statue of Eris were all eclipsed. Compared with that perfect body, his companions always had some shortcomings, and the statue of the god of love seemed to be a poor imitation of the gods by humans, and the young man was the real god of love. The young man was like a bright light in the dark night, firmly attracting everyone's attention. The reserved ones secretly paid attention to him, while the enthusiastic ones praised him directly. Look, there is Ganymede, too. If I were Zeus, how great it would be. I would turn into a vulture at this moment, capture him and bring him to Mount Olympus, to pour wine for me. The famous Milesian poet Thepus, who had just arrived in Athens, was discussing his new work with his followers near the atrium of the columns. He asked in amazement, whose son is that? He is as beautiful as Adonis, free, who is loved by both Aphrodite and Persephone. The followers also looked in the direction of the young man with great admiration. One of them replied, that is Cerberus, the famous son of the gods in our city. How enviable. He is young, has such a beautiful appearance, and his family is so rich. He must be the happiest person in the world. The ancient Greeks believed that the happiest people in the world should have beautiful looks, abundant money and a healthy body. Cerberus was beautiful, had a wealthy family, and was the favorite of the god of medicine. It was impossible for him to be unhealthy. He did not meet any of the requirements. Tibbus looked at the boy for a while, but said, but I see that his expression does not look very happy. Cerberus was indeed very unhappy at this time. No one would be very happy to be stared at naked by a lot of people, except the ancient Greeks. With their customs and way of thinking, they should not only be very happy, but also very proud. But Cerberus was not an ancient Greek after all. He was an adult who could tell what these eyes meant. After traveling for so long, he had fully understood the bad habits of the ancient Greeks. They were morbidly obsessed with boys, and they were not ashamed of it. Instead, they rationalized their behavior in the name of shaping a good mind, instilling good morals and courage, and even beautified it, and were proud of it. Is it necessary to establish an ambiguous connection with the next generation in mind, and even in body to educate them? Absolutely not, right? But the people of ancient Greece absurdly did not think there was anything wrong with this. Even Plato only advocated spiritual love. Of course, Cerberus understood how easily people are influenced by the environment. When you are born, you will take it for granted that the world should work in this way. It is hard to imagine that there is another way of life. Even if people 2000 years later are the same, is there no absurdity in the marriage system 2000 years later? Many places are just as absurd, but people are just as accustomed to it. But Cerberus will not compromise, just because everyone has become accustomed to it. Traveling back to more than 2000 years ago, succumbing to the will of pedophiles and being molested, this is simply a big joke. But when he is not strong enough, he will not be stupid enough to directly confront the whole society. Last year, Plato's business suffered a great setback. The 11 high-value maritime commercial loans issued by the bank were attacked by pirates one after another, when the merchant ships were carrying goods to sea, and the merchants lost all their money. According to convention, Plato would waive the principal and interest of the loan in this case. The money that Plato used to lend was the deposits of others. After the news spread, the depositors were afraid that their money would be lost, and they rushed to withdraw. Cerberus mortgaged all his family's properties, but failed to resist this trend. Just when Plato was about to be forced into bankruptcy, the Alcmaeon family injected capital to stabilize the situation. In order to thank the Alcmaeon family for their help, Cerberus donated 10% of the shares to the Alcmaeon family. But Plato was seriously injured by this incident, and has not recovered yet. Afterwards, Cerberus investigated the matter, and found that someone was targeting him. Someone in Athens deliberately sent a message to the pirates, telling them what goods were on these ships, the time of departure route, and the force of the ships, so that the pirates could rob these ships. Cerberus certainly would not suffer this loss in vain, but because of the lack of evidence, the punishment those people would receive, if they went to court, would be limited, so he retaliated privately with his own means. Some powerful people in Athens had guessed the truth of this incident. His means of revenge seemed too cruel and disturbing to these people, and they were afraid of him. Athens was still his foundation, and he had not yet gained the strength to gain a foothold elsewhere, so he did not want to be too different when he was still unstable. Boys from wealthy families in Athens had to go to gymnastics school when they were 13 or 14 years old. This was the only way to enter public life, and was very important. They had to exercise their bodies and learn 5 sports in school. Athens was constantly at war with foreign countries. Unless they were disabled or too old or sick to hold a sword or gun, ordinary citizens had to go to the battlefield, which could help them survive on the battlefield. Cerberus did not reject going to gymnastics school. He had long heard of the importance of physical exercise in ancient Greeks, but he did not expect that ancient Greek children did not wear clothes during physical education classes. Of course, he could ask someone to make some clothes suitable for sports for him, but that would be more eye-catching than being naked. With the gossipy level of Athenians, it would cause the whole city to talk about it. He could have chosen not to attend the gymnastics school and hired someone to teach him individually, but he had never thought of this before. He had already applied to a gymnastics school run by an Olympic equestrian champion, and dropping out for no reason would have offended people. The reputation of an Olympic champion is higher than that of a general who wins a war, not to mention that the equestrian champion, who is only for the rich, can be said to be a hero of Athens. Cerberus did not want to make an enemy easily, and after several contacts, he felt that the champion was a good person and a good teacher, so he continued to attend the school. The teachers and students in the gymnastics school had no evil intentions, and everyone was open and honest when they were naked in front of each other, and Cerberus did not feel uncomfortable. There was not enough space in the training and running school, and when he came to the gymnasium, he was stared at by many ambiguous and even obscene eyes, which made him annoyed. Chapter 100, Stadium, Part 2. Cerberus had never thought that there was anything shameful about his body, so although the custom of naked classes in the gymnastics school was surprising, he followed the local customs, but the stairs on the training ground were too much. He ran a few laps on the sports field with his companions under the guidance of the teacher with an expressionless face. He decided not to attend other gymnastics classes, except horse riding and charioteering in the future. Cordless was fully capable of guiding him to exercise his body. Learning the fighting skills that Cordless had forged in the Sea of Blood was definitely more practical than learning discus throwing, wrestling, and running in the gymnastics school. The track of the sports field was a sand track, and the dust flew when they started running. After running, everyone was sweating profusely, and their heads and bodies were covered with dust, which was very uncomfortable. There was a special bathroom in the sports field, and the teacher took them to the bathroom to take a shower. Entering the bathroom, Cerberus's three views were refreshed again. There was no water in the so-called bathroom. It was just an ordinary room with some low beds and many olive oil cans. There were some half-moon iron scrapers hanging on the wall. Some people who were covered in dust and sweat after exercise sat, or half lying on those low beds, smeared olive oil all over their bodies, massaged their skin to soften it, and then scraped off the dirt with iron scrapers. When Cerberus walked to the door, the strong smell of olive oil mixed with sweat hit him in the face, almost suffocating him. He stopped outside the door. On a low bed beside the door, a person happened to scrape off a grey-brown mixture of grease, sweat, and dirt from his body. The thing stuck to the blade, and he threw it away, and it flew towards Cerberus. Cerberus retreated suddenly with unprecedented agility, and the thing brushed his toes, and splashed on the ground 1 centimeter in front of his toes. The expression on Cerberus' face was cracked. In his previous life, he crossed the battlefield in Syria, and was pointed at his head with a gun. He was not so terrified. He never had the courage to go near the bathroom again. The teacher asked curiously, "Cerberus, why don't you go in?" He made up an excuse and said, "Teacher, I suddenly remembered an urgent matter and I have to go home immediately." He went to the locker room to get clothes, and put them on, and walked out of the stadium alone in embarrassment. Seeing that Cerberus was alone, many people in the stadium, who were ready to move, immediately moved in his direction, wanting to stop him, and say a few words to him. The first person to achieve this goal was a man in his 30s with a very gentle temperament. He held a few pages of papyrus with words in his hand, and stood at the edge of the stadium in a snow-white himachal, watching Cerberus and his companions race under the guidance of the teacher. When Cerberus and his group walked to the bathroom, he walked to a nearby place and waited. Cerberus saw him, and his expression sank. He seemed not to notice Cerberus' displeasure, and smiled as he stroked the sweat stains on his shoulders, and said affectionately, "Cerberus, why are you leaving without taking a shower? Do you think the bathroom is too dirty?" Cerberus stopped and said coldly, "If you do that again, I will chop off your hand." The man said with a bit of embarrassment on his face, "Cerberus, are you talking to your teacher like this?" Cerberus said, "If you want people to respect you as a teacher, you must first behave like a teacher." The man acted very wronged, raised his voice and said, "Cerberus, are you accusing me of not fulfilling my responsibilities as your teacher? Didn't I teach you knowledge with all my heart? Am I not good enough to teach you? I, Cletus, have never lost in the court of Athens, and my spring song won the championship in the singing competition at the Olympic Games. Do you think I'm not worthy of teaching you rhetoric?" When the people who were closer to them heard his words, they slowed down their pace hesitantly, and looked at Cerberus with some doubtful eyes. In ancient Greece, people generally respected teachers very much, except for the Enlightenment teachers who were slaves, and believed that the greatest virtue of young people was humility. Questioning that teachers were not worthy of teaching themselves was obviously not a sign of humility. People who heard these words more or less doubted Cerberus's character. If it were an ordinary boy, he might be panicked when hearing the teacher say this, but Cerberus would not be afraid of such a little trick. He looked at him coldly and was about to speak when a pair of hands pressed on his shoulders and said, "Cletus, I remember that you are no longer Cerberus's teacher, and you are indeed not worthy of teaching him. Teachers teach students to impart knowledge to them, not to use the excuse of imparting knowledge to seduce students to become their loved ones. Not to mention deliberately ruining his reputation when you can't achieve your goal." This time, the strange eyes fell on Cletus again. Cerberus looked back, his expression softened, and he called out, "Aristides." Aristides touched his shoulder in a comforting way and walked out of the stadium with him, ignoring the red face of Cletus. It was July, and the weather was very hot. The two walked along the shade. Cerberus asked, "Aristides, when did you come back?" "Some time ago. Athens had a small war with a neighboring city-state, and some citizens went to the battlefield, including Aristides." Aristides replied, "It was yesterday. We have won the battle, and the commander is negotiating war compensation with the people of Pairs. We soldiers came back first. Does Cletus often bother you like this?" Cerberus said with disgust, "This is the first time I have met him in public since I dropped out of school with him." Aristides said apologetically, "I'm sorry, Cerberus, I didn't expect Cletus to be such a person. When you asked me to find a rhetoric teacher, I should have been more careful and learned more about him." 3 years ago, Angus, the grammar teacher who enlightened Cerberus, told Cerberus that he really had nothing to teach him, and he should find a special rhetoric teacher. Cerberus asked Aristides to recommend candidates. Aristides recommended several people, among whom Cletus agreed that Cerberus could go to class at a more flexible time, so Cerberus chose him. At first, Cletus taught Cerberus attentively, and he was indeed talented, so Cerberus was very satisfied. But as Cerberus grew up and entered adolescence, Cletus gradually began to behave inappropriately towards him. At first, it was just subtle teasing and hinting in words, such as claiming to teach him to write love poems, reading love poems for him, and writing love poems for him, and telling touching stories about the super friendship relationship between teachers and students, trying to brainwash him. Cerberus reacted coldly and was unmoved. Once when no one was around, Cletus actually tried to attack him. Although Cerberus was young, he had learned fighting from Codrus for many years, and he was not a person who would suffer a loss. He let him know why the flowers were so red on the spot, and then dropped out of school from him. Cletus originally tried to save the situation and cover it up, and even found Aristides, wanting Aristides to help him persuade Cerberus to go back. Cerberus told Aristides about his behavior, and Aristides was extremely disgusted with him. The ancient Greeks did not object to adult men pursuing boys, but strangely, most fathers did not like their sons to be pursued by teachers and to have further relationships with teachers. Aristides watched Cerberus grow up and always cared about him as a brother and a friend. He also thought that Cletus' behavior was very inappropriate. He said, "I will go and warn Cletus to stop his inappropriate behavior. He has gone too far." Cerberus sneered and said, "Don't worry, if he behaves inappropriately again, I will let him know the consequences." Aristides knew his ability, but still reminded, "Don't confront him directly in public, it will affect your reputation." Cerberus didn't care about his reputation, but thanked him for his kindness and replied, "I will pay attention." Aristides asked again, "Why did you come out without taking a shower? Is there something wrong?" He didn't know himself as well as Cletus in this regard. Cerberus said a little helplessly, "No, it's just that there are too many people in the bathroom, and I don't want to wait. The weather is very hot. I want to go to the Ilissus River to take a bath and swim." Aristides encountered the conflict between Cerberus and Cletus as soon as he entered the stadium. Before he had time to take off his clothes to exercise, he smiled and said, "That's a good idea, I'll go with you. I don't want to go back to the stadium either." So the two of them walked towards the Ilissus River together. They chatted as they walked. Cerberus asked, "Aristides, how many times have you been to the battlefield?" Aristides thought for a moment and said, "The 6th time." Cerberus looked at Aristides with his head tilted, and felt that the murderer sore tempered by the blood and fire on the battlefield had not yet dissipated. Coupled with his own calm and gentle temperament, there was a contradictory charm that was very attractive. He asked a little strangely, "Aristides, Since you became an adult, Athens has only fought 6 or 7 wars with foreign countries in total, and you apply to go to the battlefield almost every time. Why? Since Athens drove away the tyrant, the city-state's strength has grown rapidly. In order to expand its territory, it has had conflicts with surrounding city-states from time to time. But they are generally small-scale wars, and citizens who go to the battlefield are generally voluntary and rotated. It is rare that Aristides voluntarily applies to go to the battlefield every time. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.